We are good to go, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the City Council meeting for April 4th, 2022. We're calling the meeting to order at 7:01. And with that, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. I've asked our Fire Chief, Mr. Bruce Barron, to lead us in the pledge.
Just before you do that, is he the phone number, Lisa?
I'm not sure, actually. To look that up.
Can we just ask our Chief of Police to do it?
You sure can.
Chief Matucci, will you be okay to do that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America, to the republic of which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And sorry about that, Chief Barron, we will get you in the next one. So thank you for that. And with that, we'll go to roll call, Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Present.
Councilmember Beach.
Here.
Councilmember Coulson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
here.
Mayor Ortiz.
Here. And with that, we'll go on to upcoming events. I do have messages from our city librarian who wants me to mention that everything is connected. A poetry event on April 1st to the 30th of 2022 for grades TK to 5. We're going to celebrate Poetry Month by writing a poem about your connection to nature, the environment, even the entire planet. Elementary age children write an original poem and bring it to the Burlingame Main Library or Easton Branch Library to receive a free paperback book. The two schools with the highest per capita participation will receive a big polar teddy bear and a cub for their school library. Also, we have story time with Youth Poet Laureate Madeline Herr, and that's on Wednesday, April 13th at 1:30 p.m. via Zoom. The library is celebrating National Poetry Month in April by inviting Youth Poet Laureate Madeline Herr to read on Zoom Change Sings, a children's anthem by Amanda Gorman, a National Youth Poet Laureate. Madeline will also answer questions about poetry and what a Youth Poet Laureate is. That sounds like a bunch of fun events. And then from the Parks and Rec Department, we have the next senior field trip is to the wine country, and that is on Wednesday, April 6th, and there's still a couple of remaining openings. So sign up and go do some wine tasting. The next free memory cafe is on Wednesday, April 6th at 2 p.m. at the Peninsula Healthcare District Health and Fitness Center. This program includes socializing and activities and is for those with mild to moderate memory loss and their care partner. Friday, April 15th is the next monthly Kids Night Out program. It's a great opportunity for a fun evening of activities for kids while parents can enjoy a kid-free meal on the avenue or a quiet night in. Thank you. And with that, we will move on to presentations and talking about the National Poetry Month. We have a proclamation recognizing April 22nd as National Poetry Month. So let me read the proclamation, then I'll pass it on to our city librarian to introduce our guest tonight. So recognizing April 2022 as National Poetry Month. Whereas the Academy of American Poets established the month of April as National Poetry Month in 1996, and whereas the National Poetry Month seeks to highlight the extraordinary legacy and ongoing achievement of American poets, introduce Americans to the pleasures of benefits of reading poetry, bring poets and poetry to the public in immediate and innovative ways, make poetry an important part of our children's education, and whereas a National Poetry Month under the leadership and direction of the Academy of American Poets is now the largest literary celebration of the world, and whereas poetry enhances and enriches the lives of Americans, and whereas poetry as an essential part of the arts and humanities affects every aspect of life in America today, including education, the economy, and community pride and development. And whereas poetry has produced some of the nation's leading creative artists and has inspired other artists in fields such as music, theater, film, dance, and the visual arts, And now therefore, I, Ricardo Ortiz, Mayor of the City of Burlingame, do hereby proclaim April 2022 as National Poetry Month and encourage the community to observe this month to celebrate the cultural riches our community has to offer and to recognize the important role poetry plays in our great nation. And with that, we will pass it on to our city librarian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council. So the original idea of this was to be the county poet laureate was going to accept the proclamation, but she was accepting one from San Mateo City Council, and Eva Chen was going to fill in. But I think Eileen might be in the audience. Anyway, Eva Chen is an amazing BHS student. I just want to read a quick bio so that you get an idea of just how amazing she is. She's a 16-year-old poet, photographer, and social justice activist at Burlingame High School. Her writing has been recognized in Scholastic Arts and Writing Competition and published in the Weight Journal, Catcher Zine, and Cathartic Literary Magazine. She co-founded Footprints on Jupiter, a teen literary magazine to raise funds for the World, for the World Literacy Foundation. In the summer of 2021, she volunteered at the California State Treasurer's Office and conducted independent research on current issues and public policy in California. She has authored a 4-page analysis paper on the Street Medicine Act, AB 369, and gave presentations on ways to address ongoing state problems through legislation. As a Burlingame Public Library Teen Advisory Board member, she helps organize activities catered to youth and teens. Some of her projects include writing workshops and a poetry slam for United Against Hate. Through Letters Against Depression, she volunteers online to write letters to those battling mental health issues. In 2022, Eva received the Young Woman of Excellence Award, the first youth poet to be inducted in the Women's Hall of Fame. The San Mateo County Women's Hall of Fame was the first of its kind in the state of California, conceived by Congresswoman Anna Eshoo in 1984 to recognize outstanding women for their achievements and contributions to the overall well-being of our county. I think it goes without saying that she is really a stellar student, and we appreciate her here to accept the proclamation. So, Eva?
Yes, thank you, Mr. McCulley, for that nice introduction. And thank you, Council and people of Burlingame, for being here tonight to celebrate Poetry Month with me. My name is Eva Chen, and it is my honor to be the youth representative of Poetry Month. I cannot be more lucky than to bring you all a poem I wrote in preparation for this day. However, before I move on, I would like to talk a little bit about poetry. I feel that it is in my position to talk about the significance of poetry and reasons why we have a Poetry Month in the first place, as opposed to a Math Month or even a History Month. First, I want to make the bold confession that I often do not introduce myself as a poet. I find that calling myself a poet can often intimidate people. Poetry, I've observed, is an art that is often regarded as boring or impossible to understand. Which I get, because before I began my own poetry career, poetry to me was agonizing over Edgar Allan Poe and trying to dissect every stanza of a century-old poem. However, that is not poetry. Poetry isn't supposed to be stressful or even anxiety-inducing. Instead, poetry is the art of observation. To be a poet is to essentially be an observer of this world. Poetry is an appreciation for people and things around you so strong you feel compelled to lift words off paper to translate your love for them. Poetry is seeing your mother smile in the waxing crescent of a moon. It is forging a connection between nature and people and yourself. Poetry is a sacred experience, and it is one that must be protected. Because to many youth poets like myself, poetry is the most vulnerable parts of us, an extension to our self-identities to which we use to navigate this world with. And so Poetry Month is not just a month reserved for poets. It is a month for anyone who holds an appreciation for anything. In the end, poetry truly is a love language. And so it is important that we encourage it into more classrooms, more schools, and more lifestyles. Because encouraging poetry is encouraging appreciation, is encouraging self-expression, is encouraging protest, creativity, and the practice of loving things from new perspectives. So with that, I hope you all enjoy my poem, Burlingame, explained by poetry. Burlingame, explained by poetry. When I first moved from the painted ladies and cable car city of San Francisco to Burlingame, a small corner of the world teetering at the edge of a peninsula, the first thing I saw was a tall eucalyptus tree looming above my house. Burlingame is a city built on the foundation of poetry. Because what is more poetic than a string of 1,000 eucalyptus trees shooting up from the ground like parachutes, only to be pulled back by the weight of gravity? Every fall, I watch cinnamon brown leaves spiral to the ground in closed perfect circles, casting forgotten memories of something once green, belonging to a past summer, now fragile and faded, crumbling at the edge of my fingertips. A metaphor that all things beautiful come as fast as the seasons change, leaving nothing but the ghosts of them behind to wither away on city sidewalks. Burlingame landscape is poetry, with hills melting into roads like full-mouthed lovers, curves that match the slope of my mother's smile, arched, beautiful, and infinite like a butterfly's wings as it opens for flight. The sun-baked limbs of the city that hugs the spine of the ocean shoreline is poetry. Burlingame people is poetry, each body molded from stardust and similes, blessed by rhymes taken from the heavens, united under one margin is poetry. At the end of this city, where the horizon bleeds into the sun, where the sea washes into the corpse of swollen sands, is a world left behind by tidal waves and monsoon winds, now home to a mosaic of people, Burlingame, who named its sanctuary. Thank you.
Wow. That was amazing. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for that beautiful poem, and thank you, Mr. McCauley, for your words. Colleagues, anybody have any words they'd like to say? Ms. Chen, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for that. You just made our meeting so much more special, and that was a beautiful poem. Thank you for that.
Thank you for inviting me tonight.
Thank you. Good night. Wow. How do you move on from that? That was amazing. So
Can we get a copy? Can we get a copy of that?
Oh,
please,
I need
Lisa?
to put that on my webpage. Yes, that's awesome.
And we should put it in the e-news.
I'll make
Yes.
sure.
I think we're going to ask our friendly librarian to get that copy for us.
That was really excellent. So, okay, with that, we will now move on to item number 7, which is public comment. This is a public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And with that, I'll pass it on to our city clerk.
I don't have any emails pulling anything, or I mean, making a public comment, and I don't see any hands up. So I think we're good to go.
Very good. Thank you. With that, then we will move on to item number 8, which is approval of the consent calendar. So first, I'll bring it to my colleagues. Does anybody want to pull anything? I see Councilmember Colson has her hand up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So I would like to pull agenda item, I think it's 8L. Am I seeing that right? L, I think. The
8L,
topic being
8L.
authorization of mayor to send letter in support of AB 1814.
Perfect. So we have 8L pulled. Any others, colleagues? And then we'll bring it to members of the public to see if there's any items that they wish to pull.
Yes, I have an email to pull item 8E.
Okay.
Then I don't see anyone with their hand up, so that should be it.
Very good. Thank you. Now bring it back to colleagues for a motion. If anybody would care to make a motion for
Mr. Mayor, I'm
items.
happy to make a motion to approve items A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, K.
Second.
And I'm sorry, I didn't see who this was. That Emily? Was that Councilmember Beach? Was that your second?
That was me.
Oh, okay, Councilmember O'Brien. So we have a motion by Vice Mayor Brownrigg and a second by Councilmember O'Brien. Roll call, please, Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Aye.
Councilmember Beach.
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Yes.
Mayor Ortiz.
Yes, and with that, we'll move on to item number 8E, which is an adoption of resolution awarding a $1,413,978 construction contract to Radius Earthworks. I'll stop reading at that point, I guess. Mr. Martusa, if you want to,
Do you want me to read the email first?
yes, please.
Okay. So this comes to us from Benito, and he says, it would be useful to hear how the city's complete streets policy was applied and what specific, if any, safety elements were incorporated in this project. It's also curious that these blocks were not the same ones presented in last year's mid-year budget meeting, or indeed even presented to the BPAC to solicit input. You'll likely say that BPAC input was sought, but that is misleading. There are at least 3 blocks that were not shared, and where both Teaspoon and BPAC would certainly have wanted to give input. Bernal between Adeline and Devereux is one such street. Anyone familiar with the neighborhood there knows that it is a prime street for middle school bike riders to go to BIS. The street does need to get paved as it is in poor condition. But has the city considered that what was once a rough street actually slows drivers down? And then that making it smooth is likely to increase the speeds and conflicts on that block? That is, unless some mitigation like speed bumps or other paint was going to be installed post-paving, which goes back to the original question. Vancouver is another such street that leads to Roosevelt Elementary and is also a bike route. Right now, that block is dug up and has metal plates which effectively act as speed bumps. What will be restored post-paving? Any consideration for safety measures? Airport at Beach Road by the Facebook campus is also an important city block where input should have been sought. That's the entrance to the Bay Trail, where there is definitely speeding and an uncontrolled, unprotected crosswalk. This is not a technical or a trick question. This paving project is a $1.8 million project. The bike ped plan calls for a $145,000 improvement on Bernal and another $145,000 on Vancouver. How is this project being leveraged to coordinate city desires? Would like to hear more on the city's approach here.
Okay, that's a lot of issues there. So, Mr. Martusa, if you want to take a few minutes to answer some of the writer's concerns, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city's process for reviewing the streets for resurfacing is based on the payment management program, and the concerns that were brought up that these are not the same streets that was presented during the mid-year budget study session. This is actually the streets from the council-approved program in July of 2021. So this is the 2021-22 street resurfacing program. So these streets are based on the last July's programs, capital improvement program. And with regards to the questions regarding speeding or the improvements, bike improvements, I do not have any responses to that. Staff, from a complete streets checklist point of view, staff goes through each of the streets and look at the context, the scope of work involved, and look at whether a bike lane or bike improvements can be added. If it cannot be added, they look at the condition and then make that proper assessment. So I do not have the detailed responses to the questions raised tonight. However, I'll be happy to go back and take a look at and then provide responses to the resident.
Thank you, Mr. Martusa, and then I'll bring it back to colleagues. Anybody have questions or Any other thoughts on this item before we move forward? Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I do think that the speaker brings up a good point that when we, for our complete streets policy, when there's, appropriate roads that could have some improvements, even if it's just sharrows, that's low hanging fruit that we can engage our teaspoon and our BPAC on those matters when it's appropriate. So thanks for continuing to keep those groups engaged, particularly on routes that lead around schools. I think that is important moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Beach. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this really isn't the time to litigate this question, but not for the first time. My feeling is that the city council is not the place to start drawing arrows. And I mean, these may or may not be good ideas. This is just not the right way to do process. So, I can't say because I don't know. I don't know each step of the process, but the process for making those kind of suggestions and having people react to them is, I think, appropriately at the commission level and the BPAC level. And it's just impossible to really deal with that kind of input at this point in the process, unless it's something really, really egregious. So they may be good ideas. It's just hard to say, and this isn't really the best place to figure that out.
Completely agree. Councilmember Coulson.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I just have a question for staff. This sort of notion that keeping a road bumpy slows cars down, but doesn't that also make it dangerous for bikers and even possibly pedestrians who are maybe exiting cars or whatever? Because I would worry that you could sprain an ankle or a biker could take a tumble. So that doesn't seem like a good strategy.
Yeah, Councilmember Coulson, you made a very good point. The staff has considered the speed bumps or humps at certain locations, and it's a very it comes with trade-offs. It produces certain benefits, slows down vehicles, but it's not applicable at all the locations. So we have tried as pilot humps in the Lionhawk neighborhood, and we are still looking at those trials. At other locations, we have done different improvements. We have added signage and on some of the streets, primarily the residential streets, there are cars parked on both sides of the streets. But that really helps slowing down the cars. So, but in terms of the speed bumps, we cannot install them at every location that is requested.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martuza. And then do we need to open it up to the members of the public again? Yes, so let's open it up to members of the public.
I don't see any hands raised and I don't have any additional emails, so we're good to
Excellent. So with that, we'll come back to my colleagues. If anybody has final comments or somebody would like to make a motion to approve item 8E.
Make a motion to approve item 8E.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Coulson, second by Councilmember Beach. Roll call, please.
go. Councilmember O'Brien,
Yes.
Councilmember Beach,
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg,
Yes.
Mayor Ortiz.
Yes. And with that, we'll move on to item number 8L. And I believe it was Councilmember Coulson who pulled that one.
Yes, I'm pulling this because we learned today that this bill has died in committee, will probably come back in some other form in another year. So we will not need to send in the letter. But just by way of acknowledgement, what this bill was doing is essentially we're trying to put 5 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2030, which requires 1.2 million electric vehicle chargers. The investor-owned utilities like PG&E pay transportation electrification fees, but the CPUC only distributes those funds for transportation electrification to the IOUs and not the CCAs. So this bill would, even though there are 11 million people like us all in CCAs. So what this bill would have done would have opened up that electrification funding to the CCAs, which is obviously very important for us to have a say in that conversation. So we'll keep an eye on it, and if it has an opportunity to come back, we'll look forward to having it on our consent item agenda for support, hopefully by this council.
Thank you for that. And Mr. City Attorney, I just want to confirm with you that we are just pulling this item and we're not voting on it.
Correct. There is no action, especially given the information from Councilmember Coulson.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Councilmember Coulson, for the recap. And with that, we'll move on to item number 9, which is public hearings. And we have a public hearing for item number 9A, public hearing and resolution for the City Council of the City of Burlingame, adjusting the storm drainage fee for fiscal year 2022-23 by 2% based on CPI. So with that, I'll pass it on to Mr. Martuza. Is that who will be presenting? Oh, our Finance Director, Ms. Yu Scott. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council member. This item is the annual rate setting for the storm drain fee. Burlingame resident approved a storm drain fee in May 2009 to fund the city's storm drain capital improvement project. The original ordinance allowed us to adjust the rate annually by CPI as a San Francisco Bay Area, not to exceed 2% each year. The February 2022 CPI is 5.2 based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics March 10 report. Tonight, the council is asked to conduct a public hearing and then approve the 2% maximum rate increase for fiscal year 2022-23. The increase is estimated to produce additional revenue of $62,520 for the city. The staff recommend to adopt the resolution and approve the fee increases. This concludes my staff report. I'm here to answer any question you may have.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions for our Finance Director? Having none, then we will open to members of the public. Madam City Clerk.
I don't have any emails on this, and I don't see anyone with their hand up.
And with nobody there, we will go back to our colleagues. And colleagues, I will, any final comments, or do we entertain a motion to approve the resolution?
Make a motion to approve the resolution.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Beach and a second by Councilmember O'Brien. And with that, Madam City Clerk, I'll pass it back to you.
Councilmember O'Brien. Councilmember Beach.
Yes.
Councilmember Coulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Yep.
Mayor Ortiz.
Yep. So thank you. With that, we move on to item number 10A, which is a consideration of 3 appointments to the Planning Commission. And are we just texting you our 3 candidates, Madam City Clerk?
Yes.
Very
but
good.
You
So
should open it up for public comment, and maybe Lisa wants to give a staff report too.
Why don't I just run through the process real quickly, if that's okay?
very
I'm gonna
good.
go off
Thank you.
just for 1 second because I have to go find my phone.
Okay.
Take a moment.
Tick tock, tick tock.
Sorry, can you hear that dog?
Oh, yeah.
I just made Kiki bark and now she's outside barking.
Sorry, can't find it. I'll just use my iPad.
Okay. I'll just do a real quick staff report. You have 3 impending vacancies on the Planning Commission, and that is due to the expiring terms of Commissioners William Loftus, Richard Tronis, and Audrey Say, all of whom have served for a while, particularly Commissioner Tronis, who may be one of the longest serving, if not the longest serving planning commissioner for the city. As we do with every vacancy for a commission, we publicize the vacancies, we send notification letters to past commission applicants for any of our commissions. We received 7 applications as of the deadline in early March. Commissioners Loftus and Toronto elected not to reapply, so the council's procedures call for extending the deadline an additional 2 weeks. At that point, we had 3 additional applications as of our extended deadline in mid-March. And then you ended up interviewing 9 applicants. We had 1 applicant who needed to withdraw. So your interviews were held last Wednesday night. And I apologize in advance if I butcher any of these names, but the applicants were Victor Enley, Chris Haran, Uma Krishnan, Sean Lowenthal, Patrick Martin, Charlotte Payton, Zachary Roslin, Audrey Say, and Baba Venkatadri. And you'll be voting for, again, 3 applicants. And the appointee terms will be for 4 years. They end in April of 2026. And if you could just open it for public comment, and then we'll go to the texting with Megan. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Madam City Manager. And with that, we will open it to public comment. Madam City Clerk.
I know you received a lot of emails today about different candidates. So I'm only going to just mark off the emails that were also sent to public comment because I know you received the others. Mr. Irving Torres sent in 2 separate emails. So he just wanted to submit his letter of support for Victor Enel and for Uma Krishnan. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this? I don't see any hands raised.
Very good. Thank you. We close the public comment. We now go proceed with our voting. So everyone will send the city clerk your choices. And I'm going to take this opportunity while we're waiting for everything to be tallied to say thank you to Commissioner Terrones and Commissioner Loftus for their service. They were wonderful commissioners and they will be terribly missed. So thank you very much.
Okay. Council Member O'Brien, Audrey Say, Patrick Martin, and Sean Lowenthal. Councilmember Beach, Audrey Say, Anil and Horan. What were their first names? Victor Anil and Chris Horan. Councilmember Colson, Audrey Say, Victor Neal, and Patrick Martin. Vice Mayor Brownrigg, Audrey Say, Chris Horan, Sean Lowenthal, and Mayor Ortiz, excuse me, Sean Lowenthal, Audrey Say, and Chris Horan. City Manager Goldman, do you have a count on that one?
I think we have Audrey with sufficient votes, and then I believe we have Sean and Chris as well. If that tracks with what everyone else had.
Yes, that tracks with what I have.
So congratulations to those 3 candidates.
Okay, so I'm sorry, could we just, wasn't clear. So C, Lowenthal, and Horan are the 3 that have been appointed.
I believe so.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, just take a moment to thank everybody else who threw their hat in the ring. We really appreciate it. There are other opportunities to participate with your community, but thank you for your time and effort, and we look forward to seeing you again at some of the future openings that we have in our commissions. And with that, are we ready to move on? Ready? Okay, so with that, we will move on to item number, let's see, that would be 10B, which is discussion and direction on potential tax measures. And I believe our city manager will take that one.
That is me, and I'm glad Megan muted herself because otherwise Kiki would bark through this entire presentation. So here we go. And Megan, if we could bring Josh Davis over and his colleagues, if he wants them over. So thank you, Mayor and Council. We are here to talk about potential tax measures. And I'll just give a staff report and then we'll turn it over to Josh Davis with HDL to go through the presentation that's in your packet. I want to remind everybody as we get started about the differences between general and special taxes because they're very confusing and counterintuitive. A general tax is a tax imposed for general governmental purposes, and the proceeds are deposited into the general fund. Requires a majority vote of the electorate to impose, extend, or increase any of these taxes. Election for a general tax must be consolidated with a regularly scheduled general election of city council members. So for us, that used to mean in November of odd number years, but now that we've switched over, it means November of even numbered years. And with the general tax, we can't tell people what we're going to do with the money, which is super counterintuitive. But that's a 50% plus one vote. And we use the revenues for any of our many worthy causes. A special tax is a tax that is collected and earmarked for a specific purpose, deposited into a separate account of the general fund. So we say exactly how we're going to spend the money, and we have to segregate the funds so that they don't get spent on general purposes. And that kind of tax requires a 2/3 vote of the electorate. And those taxes do not need to be consolidated with the council election. So any election, we could bring forward a special tax if the council is so inclined. So we've been here a few times before to talk about potential tax measures. We started back in September of 2021 with the looking at possible measures for the November 2022 ballot, when again, we have 3 council seats up for election. During the September meeting, council directed us to explore a few of the options discussed at the study session, return with additional information. At that point, we were looking at a business license tax, a cannabis tax, and a tax measure similar in structure to the city of East Palo Alto's Measure HH. And this was brought forward by Councilmember Beach, who was tracking this one, which we appreciate because we didn't know anything about it at the staff level. And that could have addressed a variety of things as a special tax, such as sea level rise, the Broadway Grade Separation Project, or some other large infrastructure project. So as I mentioned, unless the revenues are pledged to a specific purpose, a business license tax and a cannabis tax will be general taxes and have to go on the November ballot. Measure HH, like parcel tax, is whenever you want ballot. So we currently levy a flat rate business tax on all businesses. So a small mom and pop business, like a dry cleaner or a little restaurant or a small retail store, pays $100. And then a large business in Burlingame also pays $100. So our auto dealers, the Apple store, Facebook/Meta, all of those businesses pay $100, which leads to some inequities in the tax system. We have a chart in your staff report. This is pulled from the last time we talked about this. It was work done by HDL that shows what our neighboring jurisdictions do. And most of those jurisdictions levy a gross receipts tax. So you can see where we are, our population, our number of businesses, the tax type, and then our revenue. And this estimated revenue from 1819 is the last pre-pandemic full year that we had. So that's the last good sample that we had. Since then, it's been pretty crazy for all of the cities. So then the numbers just aren't as relevant. Our tax was last revised in 2001. You can see that almost everybody does a gross receipts tax. I understand that Belmont is looking at a business license tax for this November, and I believe they're looking at a gross receipts tax. Right now, they're employee plus a flat rate. And South San Francisco has the same employee plus flat rate. So staff worked with HDL, our sales tax and business license tax consultant, to look at our business license tax and determine other ways that we could levy the tax that weren't flat tax, and particularly a very low flat tax, which again, doesn't lead to a whole lot of equity when you're looking at the teeny tiny business and the giant conglomerate paying the same amount of money. So we had another study session back in February, and HDL companies presented the council with 3 alternate business license tax structure. 1 was a flat rate model and 2 were gross receipts models. And all of them would have increased our business license revenue. The flat rate model that was presented would not have just addressed our existing equity issue. So then we turned to the 2 gross receipts model. Those would have injected more fairness into the business license structure, but one of them really would have had a very large impact on many of our larger businesses, and the council was concerned about that. That staff report, that study is attached to your staff report. So after that study session, staff met again with HDL to look at alternate models for the business license tax that would address some of the concerns that were raised at the February study session. We have a new presentation. Again, Josh Davis from HDL Companies will go through that for us. And it includes 4 new models for the council's considerations. All of them will result in varying levels of increased revenues to the city. None of them as high as the final model in the February study session, which would have jumped us from, I believe, second lowest in revenue realized to the second highest or third highest. So these ones are more in line with kind of a middle range tax. First model, and we'll go through this, contains two options, both of which are just simple tax increases. One just raises it by $25, $50 or $175 across the board. Again, you don't address any of the equity issues in that. The second option does a little bit to address that. Tax would go to $150, $200, or $300 with the amount levied on gross receipts. So the little guys would pay $150. The medium-sized businesses based on gross receipts would pay $200, and the bigger businesses would pay $300. Those numbers can change really easily. That's, taking a very simple model and just changing the numbers. So you could go 150, 200, 300, you could go 200, 400, 600. There's any ways you could slice that if the council was interested in that. Models 2, 3, and 4 are all variations of gross receipts-based models. In Model 2, we get into the classification-based rates where, depending on the type of business you are, you pay one amount versus a different type of business pays a different amount. That got a little complicated when we were talking about it the last time around. I think the council was a little concerned about the complexity of that one. But it does have the benefit of spreading the burden of an increase across multiple business types. So you can really tailor the way the rate is applied to the different sectors of businesses. We also had ways of models 3 and 4 single gross receipts rates. So instead of doing those classifications, just single rates, we had a cap in model 4, actually several different caps. So we really played with different variables of ways to get at these different types of taxes that might be more palatable to the council if you wanted to go forward. We also talked a little bit about a retail delivery tax. As council will recall, you adopted an ordinance way back in February a year ago, 2021, allowing cannabis retail delivery from businesses located within the city limits. So this is warehouse type delivery. It's not somebody driving up to a storefront on Burlingame Avenue and buying their cannabis. So during that meeting and an earlier discussion of cannabis retail delivery, council expressed some interest in levying a cannabis delivery tax. And that could bring in a lot of money for us. We're not entirely sure because we limited the number of businesses allowed under the ordinance to 4. And at this point, we don't have any businesses that have gotten all the way through the process. So Kevin Gardner, our community development director, can certainly speak to where any of the businesses are in the process of going through the planning commission or applications or whatnot. And finally, there's the Measure HH type parcel tax. So the way East Palo Alto did it, they put a parcel tax on commercial office space of 25,000 square feet or more at the rate of $2.50 per square foot. And that measure was estimated at the time to raise $1.675 million. They specified that money would have to go to housing and career programs. As a parcel tax, and especially a parcel tax that specifies where the money is go, it was a 2/3 vote required. When we talked about this with the council, there were some council members interested in pursuing a similar measure and perhaps using the funds for sea level rise or to pay for our share of the Broadway grade separation, assuming that we get, the federal and the state and the county and regional dollars that we would then, help close the gap with that funding. And we asked HTL to do some pretty broad estimates that some of the some of the property information about square footage was not entirely available to them. So they did their best and came up with how many businesses we have, commercial office buildings that are 25,000 square feet and above, 50,000 square feet and above, and 100,000 square feet above. And you can see that, and Josh will go through it in the presentation and what the revenue raise would be if we did the $250 per square foot like East Palo Alto did. This is, again, a parcel tax. It's a special tax, and it could go on the November 2022 ballot or a future ballot. So the business license tax, we're only looking at a November of even year tax measure unless you decide you want to target the monies to a certain purpose rather than general governmental purposes. Parcel tax, we're looking at November or any subsequent ballot. At our last study session, Councilmember O'Brien asked staff to look at other tax measures that could appear on the November 2022 ballot. You have to think about what's the entire environment around your what you're doing, because people, when they finally get down to the bottom of the ballot, which is where city measures appear, they've gone through a lot of other stuff. And if they've gone through a lot of other tax measures, they're going to get to our tax measure and, you know, throw up their hands. So you really want to understand what kind of what the environment is out there. So at the state level, we're still a little early to know exactly what's going on, but there are 4 initiatives that are cleared for signature gathering. None of them have gotten the requisite number of signatures, so they may not make it to the ballot, or they may make it to the ballot. We don't know yet. And they're all programs that really target high income folks. So one would increase the tax on personal income over $2 million to fund programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another would increase the tax on personal incomes over $5 million to fund pandemic detection and prevention activities. And then there's 2 very similar measures that would increase taxes on high value properties over $4 million in order to increase the portion of a homeowner's property value that is exempt from tax from $7,000 to $200,000, which is quite a jump. And then also provide some income tax credit for renters. So again, none of these have qualified for the ballot, so we're just not sure if any of them will make it. But there is one measure that it's not 100% set in stone yet, but the county is working very diligently on a measure that, from what we hear, is fairly similar to the measure HH East Palo Alto tax. So at the county level, they're looking at a parcel tax measure that would address perhaps climate resiliency, wildfire risk, and emergency preparedness. And what they're exploring is a per square foot tax on all residential and commercial, so not just the commercial office, but residential, commercial properties in the county, and maybe in the 3 to 5 cent per square foot. So a much lower tax, but on a much broader base. So we don't know. I understand that they've hired TBWB, which might have some additional letters on the end of that acronym now, to help them through it. They're doing some polling. So my guess is the county will solidify, you know, its decision in the next couple months. That doesn't leave a lot of time for the city of Burlingame. If we wanted to pursue a similar tax to that, I think it would behove us not to do that. You don't want to be on the ballot with another tax that looks very similar to your tax. It's guaranteed to not do very well for you, or practically guaranteed. So all of that is to say, we're looking for a lot of direction from you tonight. If we are going to go forward, we really need that direction tonight so we can hire a polling firm and at least get one poll in the field before the council would have to vote. We have until 88 days before the election to get something on the ballot. That takes us to about the end of the first week or into the second week of August, when you are on recess. So really, we have to get something to you by the second meeting in June in case we need to come back again to fix something. So that means we're looking at the second meeting in June and the first meeting in July to get a ballot measure to you, unless we call a special election, or sorry, excuse me, a special council meeting while council is on recess, and those are a little difficult to do. So with that, I'm going to ask Josh from HDL to go through his presentation. And then certainly if the council has questions of me before Josh goes through his presentation, I'm happy to answer that. He may answer a lot of your questions. So I don't see any hands raised. So maybe I will just ask Josh to launch in, and then feel free to let us know, council members, if you have any other questions for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Manager. I went ahead and put the presentation up on screen. Can everybody see it? Hopefully we're good. All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for the opportunity to display the business tax update. We took a lot of information and worked with the city during the feedback the council provided last time to really sort of drill down on some of the options and what was really the issues that council wanted to see addressed, and go back to the drawing board and come up with some options. The first model, as the city manager discussed earlier, was simply just a flat increase to the existing rates. So what we were trying to do is say, if we were just to make modifications to the existing rates, move from 100 to 125, what would that look like? Or up to 150. So these simple 25, 50, or 100% increases are even, certainly optionable. And we looked at that as an option of not just by what would that look like at the city, but of course, with all these models, what would they look like to the business community as well? So as we can see here, a small business that's, potentially the 3,712 businesses that fall into that category of making less than $250,000 would pay $150. Also an option would be to make a scale for 250 to $1 million that does 200. So really just taking sort of flat fees and either applying them across the board to everybody or creating a variety of scales that takes into account how much revenue they're making. Either way, this keeps with it the same concept of the fee structure the city has now. So pros are that it is very simple and easy to maintain. However, it does, sort of have the same problem of potentially being regressive and not adapting as much to the future in terms of the change in the business community. So these options certainly range between between 729,000 and 1 million in total revenue to the city. For our next model, we took the recommended model that was provided by HDL, and oh, sorry, I'm going to skip down one real quick. Apologies. And this rate is a business tax gross receipts rate that's based on classifications. So the purpose of the classification-based rates is, as the city manager indicated earlier, to sort of spread the burden out. Because the city is preempted from taxing on net income and can only tax on gross receipts, the purpose of classifications is to identify specific categories that typically have higher margins and can support higher rates, whereas many of the businesses, potentially like in retail and some of the other industries, generate less margins and so cannot tolerate such a high tax on gross receipts because they've got sort of, for an example, a high cost of goods sold or other item that you're not allowed to take into account. Under that model previously, we had pretty much what is considered to be the standard rates in California. We took the feedback from the council and adjusted those down about 50%. So that went from a range of about $1 to $3 per thousand for the varying classifications, down to 50 cents to $1.50 per thousand. So each of the categories are placed in pretty much for standard practice, in the state in terms of the way that most cities who are adopting these models are going. And we did some analysis to break that down and put these people into their additional categories. And the city ends up, approximately around 2.3 million in total revenue with the classification-based rate. Similarly, as we mentioned earlier, with the original proposal of this rate can be modified or adjusted. You can expand or contract the categories. We can adjust the rates from 30 cents to $1 instead of 50 cents to $1.50. So there's a wide variety of ways to tackle this tax structure, but it gives you the greatest flexibility in terms of accomplishing the equity, as well as adopting and preparing for change in the community. So while the city sees the 2.3, what does that mean for an impact on the business community? So here we have some examples of businesses. This doesn't necessarily reflect any specific businesses, but kind of state averages and things that we see. So if you're, a service business, an auto service business with 5 employees and making about $400,000, your current rate is $100, and under this model, you would go up to $400. And as you can see down through the table, things depend on obviously the size of the business and the amount of gross receipts or estimated gross receipts they're making. So you can see something as low as a couple $100 for your casual dining restaurant to something as much as $1,000 for a boutique retail store that's generating, a couple of $1 million in gross receipts. So those rates will vary depending on the amount of money that the business is making. The smaller the business, the less they pay, and the larger the business, and the more they earn, then the more they pay. So in addition, we also took a look at a single gross receipts model. So rather than the classification-based structure, we looked at an option of a more simplified version. Everyone pays basically the same base rate. In addition to that, sort of a single base rate where it's spread out across all businesses, we also took a look at the thresholds, as was brought up in prior conversations. So taking the base rate for the first $25,000, then taking the base rate to cover the first 50,000, and then taking the base rate to cover the first 75,000 are an example of model A, B, and C here. So looking at the top line, we've also split out a difference between the 50 cents per thousand or the half mil and 75 cents per thousand or 3/4 mil. So if you look for an example at model 3A, there's at a half a mil or the 50 cents per thousand, in total, the city generates 1.4 million, or at the 3/4 mil of 75 cents per thousand, it's 1.9. That number, would be for the base rate applying to everyone under 25,000, but we extend that and the revenue sort of dives down slightly if we basically provide a threshold of 50,000 or then up to a threshold of 75,000 that the base rate covers. So basically anyone who makes less than $25,000 in option 1 doesn't pay any percentage of their gross receipts. And in models 2 and 3, subsequently, anyone who makes less than 50 or less than 75 wouldn't pay any additional mill on their gross receipts. So what that looks like to the business community, again, for these different options with the single gross receipts, we've done a number of examples here, just laying out the different types of businesses. Again, same situation, again, ranging from slightly less this time, $100, $120, up to around the same $1,000 mark for those different variant options. Of course, the higher the threshold and the lower the percent or cents per thousand, decreases the effect to the business community. Our next model is a gross receipts rate with a maximum payment cap. So what we took into account in this situation was similar to what we have in some of the other items, in the sense that a single gross receipts rate across the board, but implementing a tax cap at certain rates. So under the first item model, we took a 50 cent per thousand gross receipts for anything over 25,000, but cap the payment at $750. So no matter how large your business gets, at the $750 is the max you'll pay. Same concept for 1,000, and then another cap at 2,000. And that brings your revenue from around the 1,072,000 up to the 1.249 million on the high end of the scale for a $2,000 cap. We also offered the same concept at the 3/4 mil, so the 75 cents per thousand, with the same caps, but just a higher base rate and a higher rate of the mill, which goes from about 1.35 to 1.62. So similar options here. We're just increasing the rates and spreading them out over the course of the categories, but putting a cap in to ensure that the large businesses aren't paying a higher rate. As we did in the prior options, we've also listed examples of what those sort of sample businesses would look like. Again, looking at an auto service business with 5 employees and 400,000. Under the first model, they're pretty much capped out at that $238 because they're not really generating enough money to get to the cap. Whereas if you look at, for an example, the retail boutique store, they will hit the cap of $750 at that model 4. And again, they'll even hit it at model 4 with a $1,000 cap, but they would not hit it with model 4 at the $2,000 cap. So they'd still be well under the cap at $2 million of gross receipts. So these are some examples of how each of those businesses calculates. And of course, we can provide a number of examples going down the road and make the calculation work for any of those businesses that are there. The next item that we were tasked with was how do we capture in or bring in potentially the cannabis tax revenue with this business tax modification? Our goal was to look at the current businesses authorized by the city and try to see if you could have a tax capture where you have expansion of the delivery area and retail sales at a rate of about 4%. We estimate somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 of revenue that can come from those classifications. And certainly some growth over time as you begin to capitalize on the market. So a cannabis tax ordinance on its own is certainly possible, but you also are able to simply do the cannabis as a business classification, similar to how we indicated before with retail, service, professional. You're able to put those all together and just create a higher rate for the cannabis classification. And we're estimating around that $300,000 to $400,000. Some of the things we have to be concerned about as well if you move forward with the business tax model, the regulatory functions still need to be considered. So while you're capturing the revenues from adding it to the business tax, there certainly is some key items that need to be addressed from a regulatory provision, such as the intent, all of the related cannabis words and phrases that need to be defined to ensure that you have good segregation between your regulatory and taxation powers. A lot of little items here, such as the development of a regulatory body, either the council or the city manager, for any sort of promulgation of rules and regulations. We also look to have a section for dedicated permits and application procedures. So all of these things that are going to definitely tie to your regulation side, not necessarily impact the tax side, but are important for you to realize that need to be addressed going forward, regardless of which model you choose, either a standalone cannabis ordinance or a business tax addendum. Finally, the Measure HH revenue potential. Again, as the city manager mentioned earlier, we took a look at the comparative parcel tax that was done in East Palo Alto and looked at a few examples for how we could look at, from a revenue perspective, what would happen in Burlingame should a similar tax pass. So we did this on a few different categories. One was greater than 25,000 square feet. So the tax would apply to all parcels over 25,000. We also looked at how much it could be if it was only for parcels over 50 or over 100. So looking at that, you range from about 2.3 million from 7 estimated parcels to 5.4 million from an estimated 34. We will caveat this as well as mentioned that a lot of the parcel data at this point is, very, very high level estimates. We're not 100% certain that each of these parcels and all of these businesses fall into those categories, but it is pretty close. And we're pretty confident that that's a pretty good estimate. And that is it for my presentation. And certainly we are definitely available for questions.
All right.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. That was wonderful. With that, I will open it up to colleagues for questions. I see Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. So my question is with regard to gross receipts. What happens to, like, say, a law firm, a banking firm or something that has a presence in a different city, that's their headquarters, maybe they have 2 or 3 people here. But so the firm's gross receipts are one thing, what's being produced in Burlingame is another. How do you calculate the gross receipt?
That's a fantastic question. The business tax is actually, it's a somewhat of a misnomer. The tax is measured by gross receipts, but it's based on and taxes on the privilege of conducting business and the business activity. So the way that is done is by apportioning the business activity, and then you derive at a percentage of business activity and a percentage of the gross receipts. So for an example, to be very simple, let's say that law firm had 10 employees and one of them was in Burlingame, but the rest were someone else. We would take 10% of their income and it would be apportioned to your city and the other 90% to another city. As a very simple example.
Councilmember Cole, well, let me go to Vice Mayor. Go ahead.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes,
okay,
please.
So the next, then the next question is there's revenue apportionment, but now we have people who are working at home, they're working here. So what happens if they're just in the city for like a day, but they work 4 days in San Francisco and then they work at home 2 days, or they're traveling? So now you have, how do you handle that complexity?
Well, obviously there's a point of diminishing return in which enforcement of that type of level of taxation is somewhat unreasonable, right? But the same principle and rule applies. So many cities have this exact situation. As you mentioned, a lot of people are working remote and those situations are there. You typically go by standard practices and you work with each business independently. But yes, literally you could have a 2,080-hour work year and you could perform 3 hours of work within the city and you can do 3 2,080ths of a tax rate.
Okay, thank you. That seems complicated. Thank you, though.
Yeah. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is almost a segue from Council Member Colson's. So I acknowledge that with a number of other cities using gross receipts that this must be manageable. So I concede that point. But it does seem very administratively complex. So how do cities manage and measure this? And how many disputes are there from some business saying, you didn't calculate it right? Like, how much administrative overhead do we have to allow if we move from what is maybe an inequitable but a very simple system to administer to what feels like a much more complex one?
Yeah, definitely the process for the most part is the same. The simplicity certainly is a little higher, I think, on your side. If it's just a flat $100 and that's what you pay regardless. However, I will be clear to point out that the reason why you haven't had any challenges to your code yet is because your rate is lower than the effect of what the cost of challenging it is. But as was mentioned earlier, like with the city of Belmont, because their flat fee has gotten up to the level of a high level, way above sort of what it started out at with CPI indicators and some of those things, and because of their revenue goals, the city has been challenged frequently, and flat apportionment and all the issues that were just brought up asking, well, how do you do this with gross receipts? Those same rule applied to you. So if you have a $100 flat fee and I come into the city for an hour, you still have to do the same amount of math legally to prorate my $100 down to a certain amount of fines. So you really don't save any administrative burden. It's just a process of doing things differently. And ultimately, people typically know their gross receipts, and that's a top line easy number. They're not having to do deductions or any of the more complex things that come with it because it's a top line without any issues. So I'd say it's pretty much the same. Most cities don't have any sort of issue managing it, and it is self-assessed. The only time cities really get involved is when there's some sort of glaring issue that pops up.
Vice Mayor, you're good with that?
For now, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One question for staff and one question for HDL. So maybe I'll just start since Josh is on a roll. My question would be and I'm sorry I didn't think to ask this in advance. It just occurred to me during your presentation. For cities that have big tech, Menlo Park, Cupertino, Mountain View, do you happen to know whether they cap their gross receipts taxes, business taxes, or do they just they don't have a cap? Because, some of those companies, and we do have, one large tech company that's just in a different league compared to our others. So can you give us a sense of what best practices are?
There are a number of cities that have caps throughout the state in varying degrees. I can say that of the majority of the new tax measures that have been adopted in the last 5 to 7 years, caps are sort of not typically adopted because of their regressive nature. As for the specific ones, I don't have it off the top of my head. I do know that some of that information is in the original report we sent, and I can make sure it gets over to the city manager or the finance director to update you with the specific ones around you and whether they have a cap.
Okay, but it's not the current trend of the new ones that you say have been enacted. Okay.
No.
And then my question, the next question is from Mr. Gardner. So if you could give us some insight, originally we started talking about tax measures because of the cannabis delivery. Can you give us a sense of how far along, are there a number of businesses that are in the pipeline that might come to fruition in the next year or two, or are they still a couple years out for the warehouse delivery? Yeah.
Thank you, council member. I would say that there's 2 that are pretty solid that should be coming online within a year to 18 months. They've been approved for their first cannabis permit. They would still need to go to the planning commission for a conditional use permit. So that's and one of them's been eligible for quite some time. So they're not really racing to that planning commission hearing, but they are pretty much ready to go. And I would think that both of them, assuming the planning commission takes favorable action on them, they could be approved within a year or so.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Councilmember O'Brien.
So one question may be for our city attorney and or city manager. And then the other one, I think, is a little more straightforward question. So I'll start with the second question. Do most of the cities incorporate an escalator to their fees or the base tax? Because, we haven't raised our business tax in 21 years. So I was kind of wondering what other cities do. Once they come up with their rates, do they keep those rates or do they incorporate an escalator with it?
For the most part, most of the cities that have a base rate similar to you, they're typically older ordinances such as yourself, and they have CPI escalators in them. So they go up by, CPI or are adjusted by council resolution every year. Most of the new ones do not, because again, pretty much everyone is moving to gross receipts because again, gross receipts has the inherent CPI built in. You don't have to have an adjuster, at the end of every year as the dollar is being adjusted in real time.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question is, this goes out to the voter. So I think it's important that whatever way we go on this, it needs to be made simple for people to really understand it and read it. I went through all these options. It's not the easiest thing to decipher. And I can see maybe people just getting frustrated, not read through the whole thing and just maybe vote no. So how many words do you have to incorporate the verbiage for a business tax? Because I think if it's too complicated that people may not read the wording for all that. And so we want to make that, I would think we would want to make this simple, easy to understand, so people are understanding what they're voting.
I'll take a stab at it. Megan might actually have a better answer, but the actual ballot question, you don't get a whole lot of words. I want to say it's like 175, maybe even fewer.
I think it's less than that. I'm looking it up right now. So
okay. So what you would do, I would think, but we would actually ask a polling firm and an outreach consultant to help us. This is something along the lines of, shall the city levy a business license tax based on gross receipts, ensuring that, funds are spent in a good way and, mom and apple pie. And then in your city attorney's impartial analysis, you would explain what that means.
So,
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really
All
good
right.
point, though.
And I guess,
yeah, because when you look at all the different categories and so forth, I mean, we've looked at it a couple of times and have a much better understanding. I just think it's going to be kind of difficult to.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't put all of that into your ballot question because you just couldn't. You don't have enough room.
So
and
you
so your
only
ballot question, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I was just going to add, you only get 75 words.
Oh, 75 words, so even less. I knew there was a 75 in there. I just added.
Okay.
So you don't get a lot of words. So you go with a very simple, kind of straightforward ballot question. And then you have your city attorney's impartial analysis where you could explain, here's what that all means. And then if the council wanted to submit, or, a subcommittee of the council or whomever wanted to submit a pro measure, whatever argument, you could explain that even more. We're trying to make the tax code more fair. We're trying to help the, mom and pops, and some of our larger businesses aren't paying their fair share. So that's where you would, get into the messaging of it all.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and
But I agree with you. It's very complicated. So we want to, if we're to move forward, and I think that's still a big if, we would want to be as simple and clear as we can be as we describe this to voters.
So I want to say, as far as the CPI adjustments or the escalators, I understand how the revenues will take care of that, except for the cap. So we would have to have something where the cap would increase based on CPI or some sort of mechanism. So, but that's why I kind of like that system. I'm afraid of the complexity. But let's just move on. And any other questions or before we open it to the public? And yes,
if I could just add, I looked at the old report that HDL gave us, and Menlo does have some caps in their business license ordinance. I don't know about Cupertino and Mountain View because they're a different county. We didn't look at those cities.
So, okay, so before we go to comments, let's go to a public comment.
You have one more.
Oh, actually, go ahead, Councilmember Beach.
Sorry, one more question just for the city manager. Do we have enough time to get a successful ballot measure on the November ballot in your judgment?
Successful.
It's very tight. We started this process last September, and if we had continued last September and had, clear marching orders at that time, I think we would have been better off. When we did Measure I, we started a lot earlier with our hiring a polling firm. We conducted 2 polls before the council voted to put the item on the ballot. When we started in September, we did our best to give you options, and you had a lot of really good questions and a lot of really good feedback. And that just took a while to come up with something. And then, what we all came up with was not satisfactory. So we came up with another iteration, but it is getting tight to do something successfully. I do worry about other measures, tax related measures that are going on the ballot at the same time. So it makes me a little nervous at this point, but that's not to say that, if the council does want to move forward with something this year versus waiting until next year for a parcel tax or the following year for a general tax, whether it's this or something else, we will get on the horn and hire a pollster tomorrow. I've already been in touch with the firm that worked with us the last time, and we'll get a poll in the field and see how we do. But this is sort of our last time to figure out what we want, and then we've got to test it. We can't come back, at the next meeting with 6 more models and, kind of analysis paralysis thing, and then expect to be able to have time to do a poll and really hone our message.
Great. I'm going to ask one question, Vice Mayor, before you. So I want to ask about the $2,000. Where did you guys come up with the $2,000 cap? What was the thinking behind that?
Honestly, there was just a lot of spitballing going on.
Oh, okay, good. No, okay, because it just struck me as low, but I'm fine. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you. I asked this last time, I think. I just want to be reminded that the cannabis tax is independent from whether or how we change the business license tax. Am I correct about that?
It can be, or if you go forward with a business tax, you can just swoop it into the business tax. You only have to go with one measure. So you can do it either way.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have heard some pushback about doing a separate cannabis tax as opposed to pulling it into the business tax, but that is clearly a policy call for the council.
You've heard pushback on that?
About whether it makes sense to do a cannabis tax at this time on its own.
I'm sorry, where'd the pushback come from?
From colleagues of yours. So that's for you all to discuss tonight and decide, do we go forward with a business tax, a cannabis tax, neither, something in the future. We have all options open to us now, but this is our last time to have all these options.
Okay. So colleagues, unless you have any other questions, I'm going to open it to members of the public. We're good. Very good. So City Clerk, please, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. We have a number of emails. So I'll get started reading those. So the first one comes from Noriaki Kojima. He says, I would like to comment on the new business license tax model proposed. I'm actually not against increasing the tax rate. However, I will be vehemently against the model based on revenue if our business structure is not taken into consideration adequately. Our company, AGISHO USA LLC, runs a restaurant in Burlingame, and like many of my peers, our profit margin is very small. For example, in 2020, myself and my business partner made about $7,500 a year, while we worked about 14 hours a day almost every single day. This means that our income was at $1.49 per hour for our pay. 2021 was a little better, but it was still around $3.50 an hour. Unlike many other industries in Silicon Valley, retail such as restaurants have very small margins. For example, our model is around 5%. My previous occupation as a lawyer was around 60%. This means that $1 million revenue, our profit will be around $50,000. Furthermore, I would like to note that some of the hypothetical business / employee count / annual gross receipt total is not realistic at all. For example, our restaurant employs 11 employees and our gross receipts are around $800K already, with a profit of around $40,000. This would make the business tax $450, which means it has taken out more than 1% of profit. This would not matter that much to a tech or professional services where profit margin is well over 30%. In that example, with hypothetically same gross receipt of $800,000, 30% profit of $800,000 would be $240,000. And therefore, the $450 business tax would only reduce the profit by 0.19%. This is why I strongly urge the city for consideration for our traditionally low profit margin businesses to have a reduced tax rate compared to businesses with higher profit margin. The culture in Burlingame resembles Millbrae and San Bruno more than other hip cities with large retail businesses, such as San Mateo, Redwood City, or Foster City. An increasing tax would drive away small mom and pop businesses like ours away. Again, I'm not against increasing the tax, but only ask you to consider more about high revenue, low profit margin businesses like ours when structuring a business tax increase. The next email I have is from Dennis Mitchell. He says, I've spoken with some neighbors about the move to increase business costs here in Burlingame. The current fee of $100 is pennies for large companies, so it should be increased. For enterprises with, say, 10 employees or less, how about $150 to $200 annually? I like shopping in town and supporting small shops and restaurants. They are already stressed by numerous demands. I think the idea of a gross receipts tax is awful, though aptly named gross. Please keep Burlingame small businesses viable. We have one from Francesca Tashin. She says, unfortunately, I will not be able to participate in the meeting, but I wanted to make sure to comment on this for Alana's Cafe. It is quite understandable the fee structure needs to change, but I have a huge issue with anyone taking from the profits of my business. We have more than enough issues with the difficulties in being able to keep up with the cost of goods, labor, and rent. There's no room to pass on costs to the customer. People will only pay so much for an egg. What we have left to offset this suggested rate hike is to cut employees' hours. I believe it should be tied to the amount of employees, not revenue. How that is calculated, I'm not quite sure, but it seems to have a better correlation to the intended fee. Jenny Kelleher, who's the president of DBID, sent in several emails. So I will read one of them, but I will forward you the rest of them. She says, to the city council members, as business owners in Burlingame, we understand the council's focus on increasing revenue in order to work towards your stated goals: sustainability, transportation, housing, and infrastructure. Although the current business license fee is lower than in neighboring cities, the current cost of doing business here can be higher, considering commercial rents, parklet and cleaning fees, local utility fees, sales tax of nearly 10%, etc. Compared to similar businesses in other parts of the country, the recovery here has been slower in many business categories, partially due to residual from lengthy local closure mandates and partly due to the local customers/community reluctance to return to dining indoors and spending time inside a retail or service establishment at pre-pandemic levels. Inflation and supply chain issues also continue to present challenges to businesses. Burlingame businesses are coming back, but it is a process. Please consider a simple flat fee increase in the business license tax. Maximum $200 to $250 annual business license fee. Per the HDL consulting firm, a simple increase could keep existing structures in place while yielding higher revenues to the city. We have an email from John Kavranian. He says, I'm writing in regards to the business license tax. The Broadway bid has not made a decision which model to support or endorse. We received the information online on Thursday late afternoon, and I emailed it to all the Broadway bid members on Friday. We have not had the opportunity as bid board members to meet and discuss the information, which combined reports total 55 pages. Our next bid meeting is April 21st, and we will try to meet beforehand to discuss this important issue. I will understand if the city council has to make a decision tonight. We understand that the license fee has not been increased in many years, and we understand that an increase is due. We also understand the city wanting to have a fair business license tax so bigger companies pay their fair share. We ask that the council minimize any financial impact to small businesses. And lastly, I have an email from Umberto Berenfus. He says, we join our local small business owners to share our concern regarding unreasonable business license fee increases that are apparently being considered. We are not opposed to an increase, but we do ask the city council to make increases incrementally over time that are fair and equitable, considering that we are just stabilizing our businesses, still recovering from COVID, in addition to facing inflation of 7.9%. And increased costs of doing businesses due to supply chain and utilities. And that's the end of the emails. And I don't see any hands up.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, then I will bring it back to colleagues for comments, thoughts, direction. So I don't see any, well, there is Vice Mayor, please start us out.
Thank you. I realize that we need to come to a resolution tonight based on the timetable, or else we're going to miss the window, is what I think I heard before. So I'm really wrestling with moving to a gross receipts tax. I know that, you know, the commentary that all the cities do it, but it's inevitably more complicated. And as you start to hear from business owners, it will inevitably lead to complaints because while we may think it's more equitable at some level, it will inevitably treat some people more harshly than others, and they won't think that's fair. You know, if all we were made up of was mom and pops and Facebook, this would be easy, but there are actually a lot of companies in between. And I have to say, from being in private investment, the notion of a tax off the top as opposed to off the net is, I really sympathize with the person who talked about running a low margin business. I mean, there's just a huge difference in businesses and their profitability. So, and then finally, I struggle with two other observations. One, if you simply doubled the tax from $100 to $200, you would be up at 1.2 million in revenue. I don't think anybody would think that was unfair after 20 years of not doing anything. And the delta between 1.2 million and these other schemes that are so complicated is on the order of $500,000 to maybe $1 million for a city that has, you know, a $60 to $80 million budget. Now, I do want to say to members of the public that we have been in a really tough position. So just as recently as 2019, our revenue was 83 million. And last year it was 62 million. So, you know, and the reason that all of our services have been maintained through this period and we haven't had layoffs is because we have a great city manager and because we have a whole lot in reserve. And surprise, surprise, those reserves have, you know, been not spent down entirely, but spent down. So it is appropriate for us to be looking at revenue measures. But I really have a problem with the gross receipts complexity and all the different scenarios where, again, inevitably, there are going to be people who really face a much larger tax bill and haven't made any more money this year than they did last year. So I personally would support a very simple expansion of the flat tax. And if we wanted to do 3 tiers, as was suggested, and I forget which option number, I would be okay with that. Sorry, one last point I wanted to make. Measure I, which we passed, you know, generated $2.5 million in revenue last year. So again, we have raised Measure I tax, we have put on cleaning fees, we have, you know, I think we're taking a good bit out of a business sector that by and large has had a really hard time of it. So I'm concerned about complex and potentially unfair outcomes that we don't see all of the implications of.
And to be clear, when you're talking about the flat fee increase with different tiers, those tiers would be based on gross receipts?
Yeah, I think they have to be because we haven't been given another option. Like I think employees would be a good metric, but that's not an option. And I understand that we can't keep studying this. So of the options that are presented to us tonight, I would either just do a simple doubling of the tax and, call it a day and worry about equity at another tax season if we had to, or flat rate, different tiers for different gross receipts, but at least it would be that's what I was talking about.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember O'Brien.
Thank you. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit from Vice Mayor Brownrigg, and this is one of the reasons why I was asking the questions I was asking earlier in the evening in regards to the complexity of all this. And I do think we need to simplify this a bit. So when looking at the cities, just so the public knows, in case I haven't read the staff report, we have the third highest amount of businesses of the cities that are listed here. And then second to last in regards to the revenue that we've received. So our revenue is 589,737 approximately. And the highest is, 6.2 million. Now that's huge difference. So what I was kind of doing when I was looking at this over the weekend was, okay, let's just take out the lowest revenue and the highest revenue. And what do we average out? And we average out about 1.6 million. And at the last meeting, I kind of wanted to get, in the middle of this list. I don't want to be toward the highest revenue in regards to this, but due to the fact we've lost a lot of revenue, the city, due to the fact we haven't increased the business tax in 21 years, I think we need to do something. And so I was actually, similarly to the vice mayor, looking at the flat rates. And so when I'm looking at our staff report, when you look at the Model 1B by business type, you have small business, you have a medium business, and you have a large business. And so I was kind of looking at those numbers. And so if we were to get, at least when I was playing around with these numbers, what I would suggest is we look at the small business, it goes from $100 to $150. I think that's fair enough to keep it at the $150. Then the medium business, I would increase that to $250. And then the large business would be $600. And if you did that, your revenue would be approximately around a little over 1.2 million. It still puts us kind of on the lower end, but it's surely better than what we were getting. And it's simple to understand just the flat rate. I would want to incorporate, though, an escalator. So we're not, people aren't looking at this maybe 10, 15 years later and kind of in the same position. Now, does the escalator need to be in every year? No. But I do think every few years there should be an escalator related to the CPI. So that's kind of the way I would look at this right now. I do think it's very important that we diversify our revenue. We've been so reliant on the property taxes, the TOT, which has fallen dramatically because of COVID, and it's going to take a few years to recover. Whether we recover to what we were pre-pandemic, don't know if that's going to happen for quite some time. So I think what I've presented is somewhat fair, and it's not a huge, increase for most of these businesses. So that's what I'm throwing out there.
And I'm sorry, so your proposal for the tiers was 150, 250, and 600?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the 600 is for the large businesses, because I am looking at those, large offices that we have, the higher, revenue incomes that they're receiving. I do think they need a much larger increase versus the small businesses, trying to keep it as equitable as possible.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Councilmember Colson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, thank you, City Manager Goldman, for the clarification around the two. I think when I first read this report, I felt like I was mixing up the measure HH and the possibility of something like that might go to fund sort of specific infrastructure needs like grade separation and sea level rise, which I think has merits. And so but I don't think that's what we want to talk about today. So I think it's something to put on the table, and we'll have to figure out at some point Do we put that on in a 23 or does it go a 25 ballot? I like that it can go off year. One of the biggest problems with rolling everything into even year numbers, all the elections into even year numbers, is that now everything has to go on an even year, or a preponderance of things have to go on an even year. And it just makes it harder and harder for little cities to pass taxes and school districts and things like that. But so I like what Councilmember O'Brien has suggested. I really don't just want to double the fee, because I think one of the whole notions of doing this work was so that it wouldn't be regressive, and that just maintains the regressive nature of the tax. So a tiny business earning $1,000 is going to pay $200, and a Facebook earning billions is going to pay $200. So I find just the doubling to be a little regressive. It doesn't solve that problem. So I like the tiered. And I also just want to point out, I think Vice Mayor Brownrigg, Measure I is not paid by the businesses, the taxpayers. If you're purchasing something, you pay the sales tax, and the business collects it and passes it through, right? So is it good? I mean it's more work maybe for the business, but that is not a tax they're paying. The consumers paying. And then I just thinking about marijuana as an independent tax, I'm less inclined to do this as just an independent tax for marijuana, because we have maybe 2, 3, 4 businesses at the most. It does look like it can bring in some revenue. I'd rather roll it in with the rest of the tax, because I've personally chaired and been highly involved in 5 parcel sales tax and bonds tax in the city, knocking on doors. It is a lot of work. And I just think there's going to be, you got to find a lot of people willing to help get this passed if we do it. So I'm willing to put it on. I'm willing to support it, but I think we want to get the business community behind us, and we want to run something that's not going to generate a lot of opposition. And if we can get the bids, and we've heard from them today, they've made some great suggestions, and we can get the business community on, and we get something that's fair to the smaller businesses, I think that's something they could get behind, and that would be a lot easier to pass. So thank you, Councilmember O'Brien, for doing all that research. I can live at those levels. I'm even okay if at the very top level, it goes up even a little higher from 600. If we needed to generate a little more revenue for some reason, I'm okay with it at 750 or even 1,000. But I'm very flexible on that. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Beach.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm struggling with this, and even some of the other solutions all around. Whatever we do, it's got to be fair. It's got to be equitable, and it's got to be worth it, because going to the ballot is a big deal to ask the voters to say yes to anything. And if I hope we could pull it off. I think we probably could, but I don't feel that the proposed kind of flat tax just increased a little bit is really worth it. From $100 to $150, why bother? I mean, yeah, it generates maybe another $500,000-$600,000 in revenue, but for the effort to go through it, when what I think we need to do is fix the fairness and the equity in the tax structure. And I'm not sure any of these proposals really get to where we need to go, but the thought of our, future biotech out on the Bayfront, or multi-10 of millions of dollar company paying $600 or $1,000 for a business tax license just doesn't feel fair. It's still not fixing the issue that we've sort of dealt with for 21 years, that a little boutique business running out of a home that maybe has $10,000, $15,000 worth of receipts, or even a business that's got $100,000, $150,000 worth of receipts, is paying the same as a multi-tens of millions of dollar business. it's not fixing it enough. So I'm definitely concerned that we're coming out of the pandemic. This is not a great time to raise taxes on the business, but this is not a great time for the city either. And we could use the extra revenue. I'm concerned about, I really like the idea of doing, if we could get a parcel tax that could be meaningful to help invest in our infrastructure, whether it's sea level rise, grade separation, or even undergrounding utility wires to prevent fires and to make our city more beautiful on El Camino Real and throughout the city. Like, that would be a worthwhile parcel tax, but this is not the year to do that because the counties might be going out for something and we've got to see if that passes. So I just want to be really thoughtful that we don't go half-stepping and do something that's not really solving the fairness and the equity issue. So I guess maybe I'll pause there and see what other colleagues have to say to respond.
Thank you. Colleagues, I see your hands raised, but I'm going to take my turn right now. So I'm leaning, I like the idea that Councilmember O'Brien came up with. And again, I do struggle with the issues that Councilmember Beach brought up, and I really do. That one that really resonates is it has to be worthwhile, right? We're going to do all this, go to all this trouble to just raise a few more pennies, then maybe it's not even worth it. But I am crystal clear that $100 a year is not sufficient. That's barely enough to pay for the cost of what we do to administer the whole program. So I know we have to raise the fees. So the question is, how do we do it? We want to be fair to businesses involved. But I agree with Councilmember O'Brien that if we go a little too far and do it a little too complex, we're going to end up shooting ourselves in the foot, and the voters will reject it because they simply don't understand it, don't take the time to read the whole thing. So I do believe we need to simplify it. I like the 3 tiers that are discussed there. However, I don't feel that I would make the lowest tier $200, middle tier maybe $3, and the higher tier $700. When I look at businesses and I'm thinking, we're asking you to pay $200 a year. I don't think that is exorbitant. I think that's reasonable, and so I would say I would go along with Councilmember O'Brien's concept. But I would like to see the escalator so we don't have to keep coming back and doing this every so many years. But I would start at 200 and go from there. And again, I totally agree with that, Councilmember Beach, with your concept that it doesn't fully address the equity issue, but we have to be realistic with what is going to pass. And if we make it way too complex, and if we give the opposition some big number to use against us, I think that will work against us. So those are my thoughts. I'll go back to Councilmember Colson.
So as a business owner in town, I can say there is never a good time to raise taxes. That is for sure. No one ever wants to do it. No one ever raises their hand and says, yay, let's raise taxes. But we haven't done it in almost 21 years. We need to diversify this revenue source. And I think we need to take a start at this. We need to we need to put something out and run it and see if we can get it passed. I think what I would like to do, and maybe the city manager can answer this, is if we agree to a basic structure, can you poll certain levels and we can see what polls? We'll know. Like if you poll it, you'll have a very detailed set of data right back, so long as they have the framework, whether it's 150 or 200, right?
We can pull different variations of the Councilmember O'Brien model. So, 150, 250, 600, we can pull the 200, 300, 700. We can do probably 3 or 4 different similar things where we just vary the numbers.
And that's what we did on the quarter-cent versus half-cent sales tax.
Right.
Frankly, that's what the county's doing on the potential for the fire, flood, sea level rise district kind of funding. And I also think that these are different enough and the structure is different enough that it won't get confused with what we're working on, what's going on at the county or even at the state. And again, I think it's really important while we're doing the polling, just to also reach out to the bids and find something, help get them behind us on this. They've all been gracious tonight and said they do understand why this needs to change. And it's not peanuts. It's not insignificant. I mean, it's taking us from, I think, what, 500,000 or 600,000 roughly up to, 1.2 million. And if you put an escalator in that pays for a lot in Burlingame. That pays for a lot of staffing. It pays for raises for our staff after we come out. It pays for streets and, police, safety, fire, everything that we have to do as a city. And I think most importantly, it helps us diversify our revenue base. And if we can get it in place with some mechanism by which we can either CPI increase it or the council can approve a recommended increase each year. If it's a bad time to increase it, we can defer and not do it. And then if it's a really robust year, we can go ahead and do it. I think it gives enough flexibility. So I would agree with that, and I can get behind that, and I would support that.
So we could, so maybe the thought, I like that thought of the count in the language, it would allow us to raise it like say 5% a year. So yeah, I kind of like that idea. So Councilmember O'Brien.
Actually, Councilmember Coulson brought up what I was thinking is we can poll and kind of figure out the exact numbers. But I look at this as two kind of different entities. So I think Councilmember Beach kind of talks about one thing, and then we're talking about something different. I'm not looking at the business license tax to help with grade separation or sea level rise or any of those. It's too big of a ticket item. I look at the additional potential, let's say 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million is more toward what Councilmember Coulson talked about. We could utilize that in our downtown areas, our sidewalks, our roads, safety issues that we're experiencing. I think at a later date, once we kind of see what the county does with their sea level rise, what they're going to put on the ballot, is that we then look, let's say, that may or may not pass, we don't know. But I do think we need to reevaluate later on those big ticket items, especially that grade separation. And I agree with Councilmember Beach that, the bigger companies should be paying more. I think it's better to look at them at a later date because they are the ones that are bringing the people to the city. They are the ones that are bringing the increased traffic. They're bringing the stress on our infrastructure. That we look at another way of charging them that will help us alleviate the infrastructure stress that we're going to be experiencing. And so that's when kind of, let's say the model of, East Palo Alto can come into play, where you're bringing in a lot more money, but you're charging the businesses that are actually increasing the stress of that infrastructure for the city. So they are being responsible then for the changes that we have to make to accommodate the increased business here in Burlingame. So that to me is something we discuss at a later date, because I do agree. They have a lot more employees, a lot more people. They're much bigger than most of our businesses here in Burlingame. But that to me, we look at separately.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thanks. I basically agree with Councilmember O'Brien. I would say that I also agree with Councilmember Beach that, this is a heavy lift for a relatively modest amount of money. And in different circumstances, maybe we decide not to do it. But really, I think of it as sort of modernizing a very old ordinance that we're almost obliged to do. Like it's ridiculous that it's $100 for everybody. So we're sort of obliged to do this almost from a housekeeping point of view. It's not going to change our budget meaningfully, but it's updating and it's fair. And then I think, and this is what I think Councilwoman O'Brien was saying, is when we have our act together to look at the kind of major infrastructure, then that Measure HH approach of a parcel tax based on square footage, which isn't revenue driven, but rather size driven, makes a lot of sense. But we're not ready to do that. I think we'd all agree we don't nowhere close to having the research or position for that. So I like this compromise where we're winding up. I like having 3 tiers. I like polling. So I think the consensus that seems to be gelling is a good one.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, I think we're all mostly in agreement with this concept. I know there's still some hesitation, but again, to me, the one thing, okay, first of all, we haven't changed this in years. So we're going from 100 to, if we're going to start, let's make it 200. I'll get off my soapbox on that one. But the one thing I want to remind everybody is we're creating an income stream that's going to continue for years and years and years. So everybody's focusing on 1 million. I'm focusing on 10 million because it's for the next 10 years. So keep that in mind. Yes, so it might not be worth it for 1 million, but it could be, you could say it's worth it for 10 million. So when we're talking about that impact, that bang for the buck, when we're investing all this time and effort into putting this on the ballot, let's not forget that it's a revenue stream that is ongoing for many years. So with that, let's talk about this. So we're going to run. So what are the tiers we're going to run through our consultant or our polling?
So we have 150, 250, 600. We have 150, 250, 750, or 1,000 has been put out there. And then we had 200, 300, 700. It's put out there.
The 200, 300, 700 sounds really good. Whose was that?
Some really clever person came up with that one.
Yeah. Okay. So how many, I mean, at some point, if we have too many of them, it's not feasible. So how many, options?
I would talk to our pollster, but I would imagine we probably want to narrow it down to 3, which would be the 150, 256, 150, 250, maybe 750, and then the 237.
Councilmember Beach, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I'd be in favor of Councilmember Colson's idea to have at least one tier that is much higher for a very, very, very large business. So maybe we go to a 4th tier for the mega type businesses that could be coming or are here.
So
something much larger. I don't know what that number is. I don't know what that appropriate is, but I'd like, but a couple thousand.
I closed the presentation. So what was the top tier? What the way it was presented? What was the top tier was for?
And I think it was 1 million and above, wasn't it?
Okay,
yeah, so your large
$1 million and above.
$1 million.
So that would be my suggestion, that we pull for something for the extra large. And I do appreciate colleagues' comments on going forth with something to sort of modernize this. I hope, and I hope you're right that the public will support us in doing something like this and still allow us the ability to consider a future revenue measure, maybe in the not too distant future, for some of these infrastructure needs, because recognizing that going to the ballot more than once is a big deal on businesses. Thank you.
I'm trying. Okay, so I found this.
So if we did an extra category, you could maybe do it for 5 million and above and make it, I don't know, $5,000 for 5 million and above.
Colleagues, what do you think?
Or 10 million and above.
Looks like Councilmember Colson has a thought on that.
Councilmember Colson.
Thank you. Yeah, I would jump it up pretty significantly, because Councilman or Vice Mayor Brownrigg and I, when we did, and I'm sure he can comment on this as well, when we were looking at the Burlingame Cares program and we were documenting the levels of gross revenues, you'd be surprised, going back to his point about the difference between net and gross, you'd be surprised how many businesses like grocery stores and things like that have very low margins, but have very high gross revenue. So I would jump that way up, or maybe give staff discretion to check in with like Molly Stone's and Safeway and a few of those low margin, high volume businesses. And maybe it's 20 million, maybe it's a big number. So we don't capture all the grocery stores and the car dealerships and everything. And maybe it's only going to apply to 6 or 7 businesses, but I think and then you could juice that up to even like, 5,000. I mean, it's not a lot, but I think what it does is it sends it's saying a message that we understand. You're using more infrastructure, you're using more, you're going to carry a little more of the burden, and we're going to shift it off the smallest businesses. So,
Okay, so
thank you, Councilman.
So to be clear, your thought is, let me go back to this. So we have the tiers would be less than 250, 250 to $1 million, over $1 million, and then over 10 million, you said, or 10, we leave that open. So we're going to have the mega tier, and we'll let staff kind of use their discretion, but somewhere between 10 and 20. Is that what you're thinking?
I would ask, maybe Councilman Brownrigg has a thought on that, just from the work we did. I can't quite remember all the numbers.
Mr. Vice Mayor, what say you?
Oh, I wish I had a memory that Councilwoman Coulson ascribes to me. I can't remember revenue rates. I do think it's a really good insight, and we certainly can run it to ground pretty quick. I don't think it necessarily has to change the polling, which is all we're doing at this point. But I would say to colleagues, while I think it's fine to poll on this, I guess I would just, when it comes back to all of us, I would point out two things. The way, if we believe that big campuses should carry more of the load, given that they're putting more stress on the system, which I think we all would agree, a parcel tax, square foot tax is going to be much more effective than just a business license tax. And sometimes when you ask a very wealthy person for $5,000 when you could have asked for 50,000, you get them saying, "I already paid you, $5. Why are you coming back at me now?" And so I think we'll just want to balance that when the data comes back and see. And then just sort of finally, there are some of these very large buildings that are going to have multiple employers within them, and those employers will not sum to these large numbers. Whereas we'd still, I think, believe that the parcel is bringing a large number of people, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that in the medium term, the parcel tax is in fact the fairest way to go at the very large buildings, the very large employers, without, a little more equitably, to use that term. So, but I don't mind polling, and we can make this decision once we see what kind of results we get.
So regarding the mega tier, you're okay with that, having a fourth tier?
Well, what I'm saying is I think it's fine to poll. I don't think we're deciding, as I understand the process, the poll comes back and then we make final decisions, right?
Yeah, well, we're trying to narrow down what we poll. We can't, so that's what I'm trying to get to, is what we're going to poll. So the whole concept of the mega tier, are you okay with that?
I guess
maybe we have a question that's, this model, and then and they might do some split sampling along the way, which is the way you kind of get at additional data. And they could have a question that says, should businesses making over 10 million or 20 million, whatever it is, pay a rate that is 5,000 or above. So you're kind of splitting it out from the model. So you're testing each of the models against each other, and then you have this like separate question, but that's really for the pollster to guide us on how to do that.
Okay, so I think, so then you're good with the tiers the way we've discussed them right now. And
so I have 150, 250, 600, 150, 250, 750, or that could be 1,000, 200, 300, 700, and then the mega tier, which is at 5,000 for whatever the number is.
I'm not sure if I like 5,000, but because that's so far away from 700 it makes me, or from the other top tier, but
and yet 5,000 times 6 businesses or whatever it is will be 30,000. I mean, it's like there's a point at which you're really just doing this as virtue signaling rather than actually moving the revenue needle.
Correct. We're not moving the needle dramatically. Councilmember Coulson, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe the first step, Lisa, would just be to work with Joshua and Eric and the team just look at your data and see, like, if you cut the gross receipts off at 10 million, are you going to pick up 50 businesses or 500 or 1,000? And then you'll know. You'll be able to, I would basically just say, let's give discretion to staff to figure out what number to pull on there. And I do agree with colleagues that to go and have this mega jump it would probably be better to have a smaller jump, like 750 to 1,000, and collect a few more businesses than it would be to have a small number of businesses with a huge number. Because if anybody reads that number, they may not process the whole thing. And then they're going, what? They're going to go from, this to that. Or somebody can use that against you in your an opposition argument and say at the top tier, they're raising rates, 10,000%. And they don't have to say against only the large company.
Right.
You know how that all works.
Exactly. They're going from $100 to $5,000. This is not fair for businesses. Yeah, I could hear it. Good. Any other thoughts, colleagues? Anybody else? With that, then let's talk. Can we talk about the escalator, and can we include something in the language that says that City Council at its discretion can raise it 5% a year?
I think you have that in your storm drain fee that you can go up to, it's CPI up to 2%. So you could have CPI up to whatever percentage. And it's the council's discretion. When we did the storm drain fee a year ago, I think it was a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, you opted not to levy it at all. Actually, it was 2 years ago in the start of the pandemic, you opted not to levy it at all because we're just in the thick of COVID and not really knowing what was going on. So I'm sure we can look at the language that's in that storm drain measure and see how that worked out.
And colleagues were all good with that escalator? Councilmember O'Brien?
Yes, I just want to raise my hand to say I would agree with that. So then we're looking at it then yearly to determine then the percentage if we don't want to go to the max percentage, correct? That's designated.
I think you would put a maximum, right? So you would put your max
so you have a
into
max
the ordinance, and
Right.
then every year you would say, do you want to levy the CPI, which is under the max, or if CPI is over the max, do you want to go to the max, or do you want to do something different?
Yeah. Okay.
Staff will probably often bring you the max, so and then you can tell us to back off.
Colleagues, any final thoughts? Lisa, there, our Madam City Manager. Any other items?
I think we have it. I think we've got it. We'll huddle and get our pollster on board as soon as possible, and I'm not sure how long that will take to get results back to you, but we'll do our best to get it to you in a timely fashion so that you can make some decisions about placement or not placement on the ballot.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. That was a very good discussion. I think we arrived at something that's workable, and I think it makes it a little more equitable. So thank you all. And with that, if I can find my agenda again, I can move on to item number 10C, which is a automated license plate reader discussion. So I will pass it on to our chief, Matucci, for his presentation.
Hey, so good evening, Mayor Ortiz and Council. I'm here tonight to talk again about automated license plate readers, or ALPRs for short. This was originally discussed at both the January 18th and February 22nd City Council meetings. Before I start, I just want to mention that this discussion tonight about ALPRs was publicized in several ways. A notice was placed in the San Mateo Daily Journal. A notice was placed on the police department's homepage with links to the previous discussions. An article about it was placed in the March 31st City e-News. Notifications were sent out on the city's Twitter, Facebook, Simplicity, and Nextdoor accounts. Notifications were sent out on the police department's Facebook, Simplicity, and Nextdoor accounts. I also want to remind everyone that this item was placed on the agenda by members of council after constituents reached out to inquire about the potential use of ALPRs in Burlingame. This is not the police department asking to use ALPRs. It was brought here tonight by the public. So I just want to quickly summarize what was discussed at the previous meetings. We spoke about the pros and cons of ALPR use. Some of the pros being locating stolen vehicles, locating missing persons, preventing criminal activity, assisting with criminal investigations. And some of the cons being privacy issues, the large data pools it creates, potential data breaches, data being used for inappropriate reasons, and costs. It was also requested that the staff gather some information from other San Mateo County cities currently using ALPRs. In reaching out to these cities, staff was referred to police departments and the sheriff's department as they're the ones utilizing ALPRs. So it was no surprise that we received overwhelmingly positive feedback. But aside from the opinions about how well they work, more importantly, we were able to gather some useful information about how they're being used. 14 out of the 20 San Mateo County cities currently utilize ALPRs. Burlingame's neighboring cities of San Mateo, Hillsborough, and Millbrae all utilize ALPRs. The average number of ALPRs in use per city is approximately 20. There was also information gathered about their data sharing and data retention policies, et cetera. But aside from that information, I think what was missing from the earlier discussions was an explanation on how ALPRs actually work and how they intend to be used. So they're primarily used in two ways: as a real-time notification system and as an after-the-fact investigatory tool. As far as real-time notifications, it alerts the department's dispatch center immediately if a wanted vehicle passes by an ALPR. The dispatch center would then dispatch officers to the area along with a description of the vehicle in an attempt to locate and stop the vehicle in question. Wanted vehicles are typically stolen vehicles, vehicles associated with a missing person, or vehicles associated with a serious crime, such as a homicide or robbery. I want to clarify the issue of arrest warrants. Arrest warrants are generally not attached to a vehicle. So a subject driving through Burlingame with an outstanding warrant would typically not trigger an ALPR notification. And I wanted to bring this up because I know this was identified as an area of concern during prior discussions. As far as the after-the-fact investigatory tool, this allows officers and inspectors to search specific timeframes in the police department's database for as long as the data is retained when investigating cold crimes. For example, if a commercial burglary took place in the downtown business district during the early morning hours, officers and inspectors could search the databases of the ALPRs located in that area during that time frame in an attempt to identify potential suspect vehicles. So having that in mind, if we were to utilize ALPRs, state law requires that we have security procedures and safeguards in place, as well as privacy and use policy in place, covering such things as authorized purposes for use, authorized users, data security and monitoring practices, and data sharing and retention schedules. Draft ALPR policy is attached to the staff report. The policy was written by Lexipol, a firm that specializes in providing police policies. Lexipol policies are based on the latest statutory law, case law, and progressive best practices. Some important bullet points from that policy: ALPR shall be used for official and legitimate law enforcement business only. Data shall be retained for a maximum of 30 days. Data will be shared by request only. Authorized department personnel shall receive proper training in ALPR use and policy, and system audits shall be conducted on a regular basis. Although we're not required by law, there is an optional additional surveillance technology ordinance that can be adopted. This ordinance would require that any surveillance technology used by the city be reviewed by City Council initially and annually at a noticed public hearing. These reviews would include such things as a surveillance impact report and a surveillance technology use policy. Surveillance technology ordinances are in place in cities such as Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley, and also BART, but none of the San Mateo County cities currently using ALPRs have adopted an ordinance of this nature. Should council wish to move forward with ALPRs, using the methods deployed by other San Mateo County cities, staff has proposed two options for locations of deployment: one larger 14 location plan and one smaller 6 location plan. But these are just suggestions and staff can work within any parameters given. So staff is asking for direction this evening regarding the deployment of ALPRs in Burlingame, and if so, whether or not to consider an additional surveillance technology ordinance. So I'll turn it over now to council for discussion, and I'm available for any questions.
Okay, colleagues, let's ask questions now, and we will wait for our comments till after public comments. So if anybody have questions of the chief? Council member or Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 questions. The first is, there are some in our community who believe we're in the middle of a crime wave. And I wonder, Chief, what do the statistics tell us about crime in Burlingame over the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, so for the most part, it's stayed pretty level. In some cases, dropped a little bit. If I can give some examples, for example, residential burglaries. Back in 2015, we averaged 5 a month. In 2018, we averaged about 3 a month. And last year in 2021, we averaged 2 a month. So they steadily went down. As far as vehicle burglaries, back in 2015, we were at 22 a month average. In 2018, it was around 21. And last year in 21, it was around 25. So a slight uptick, but still 22, 21, 25. Commercial burglaries back in 2015, we were at 8. In 2018, we were at 5 average a month, and at 2020, we were still at 5. Stolen vehicles in 2015 was 10 a month. 2018, 4. It was a significant drop actually that year. And in 2021, we were around 7. So those are some. I have some other, if anybody's interested in specific, but those are just kind of general idea. It's just kind of been steady, if not dropping a little bit.
I appreciate that. I think that you and your team have done an amazing job keeping our city safe. And I think this conversation will take the course that it does. But I don't think making policy on a basis of fear is ever a really good idea, especially if the fear isn't warranted. So I appreciate that data and that kind of context setting. My other question has to do with this question of warrants. I know I'm the one who has worried about that. And I worry about it because a lot of the research that I read and the policies that other forces have used is they are willing to pull over, quote, people of interest. And I don't know what a person of interest is if it's not somebody with a warrant. So I understand that the warrant doesn't attach to the license plate exactly, but the owner does. And I still think you can manage around that. But I think it feels to me like inevitably we are going to, one of the reasons to have these things is to pull over people who may be wanted. Is it not the case?
I don't think so. I think primarily I've talked to other agencies and 95% of the hits they get are stolen vehicles.
Right.
And then the other percentage is missing persons. And then occasionally, let's say occasionally you'll have some type of want on the plate, whether it was involved in a homicide, whether it was involved in a an Apple store robbery, something like that.
Right.
Very seldom do you, if I say had a warrant for shoplifting, when it gets entered in the system, it's with my name. They don't look for vehicles registered to and attach that warrant to vehicles. So, I should have mentioned this earlier in the staff report. I just thought back to when I was working patrol and, I'd run a plate and never did it come back as a person in the vehicle was wanted for anything. It was always attached to the vehicle. It wasn't until I made the stop and I walked up and I got the person's ID and ran the person did any warrant for that person ever show up. And I started thinking about it, after the last council meeting. And I thought I need to look into this because I didn't give you great information there.
Thank you, Chief. I've got comments, but I'll hold them per the mayor's request.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So thank you. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess this is a question for our city attorney or police chief. The city of Alameda recently passed a new fixed automated license plate reader draft a policy that was sort of based on Lexapol, but sort of worked in conjunction with civil liberties advocates. Have you guys had a chance to look through that? I know that there's been some emails circulating around. Have you had a chance to look at the differences between our proposed and that one?
I haven't, but I could certainly reach out to Alameda and take a look. Yeah, I haven't though.
So Councilmember Beach, I have had an opportunity to review the Alameda policy, and it certainly is more robust than the draft policy that's part of your staff report. And the policy, the draft policy that's attached is just that, is a draft. And so it is intended in part to give a framework for the discussion tonight. And if the council, based on the council's direction, right, then we could incorporate certain aspects of that policy or any other direction that you give us in whatever final policy the council adopts if we wish to go forward with ALPRs.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I do have a question. Some of these, some of the policies that you mentioned require an annual review, but the ones that don't require the annual review, in those cities, does the council get periodic reports on how the cameras are working?
So I think the annual reports, and city attorney can chime in here if he wants to. The annual reports are when they're attached to the additional what's it, the surveillance technology ordinance specifically. If you don't want to add that surveillance technology ordinance, then technically the policy we have it doesn't require that. But we could always add that in. We could always, I could always prepare an annual report or even a quarterly report, however you want to do it. We can pretty much do whatever we want, basically, as far as reporting back to council. Whatever makes me comfortable.
My question is more, do other cities have it as a practice to report back statistics and to the council?
I'm not aware of any San Mateo County cities that are doing that, but obviously San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, BART, as part of that additional surveillance technology ordinance, do have to go. I think they have to go every year and actually get permission to continue to use them.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's kind of my sense. Yeah. Colleagues, any other questions before we open it to members of the public? None. So with that, Madam City Clerk, it's all yours.
Let's start with the hand that's raised, which is John Martos.
Hi, Chief. Good evening. Thanks for the presentation. I read the report a little bit. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to ask a question, but I was wondering about the cities that have not adopted ALPR, if they gave you any reasons why they haven't done that. I know there's quite a few in our neighboring cities as well that have, and a lot of enthusiasm, positive feedback from those cities, but the ones that haven't adopted, I think Foster City maybe doesn't have a program. Did they give you any reason why not?
The people in San Mateo County that I talked to is primarily just some hesitancy from their governing bodies about the privacy issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Our next public commenter is Brian Hoffer.
Good evening, Mayor and honorable council members. Brian Hofer, I'm the Executive Director of Secure Justice. I also have the privilege of chairing the City of Oakland's Privacy Commission, and I've co-authored 5 of the 7 surveillance ordinances that you folks have been referring to. I want to first commend you. You guys have done a really great job providing public opportunity. The outreach is certainly commendable, and I applaud you for taking the time to carefully think about this. Just to make a slight correction to what Councilmember Beach said, we expect Alameda to adopt their policy tomorrow. Everybody I've spoken to is in agreement, so I think it'll go through unanimously. We sent a letter to you today where we highlighted some areas for improvement in your draft policy that we would recommend. And I would maybe present another option for you tonight. SB 34, the state law requires that you have a use policy in place before implementing ALPR. And if the sense of this body is that you really need to go forward now, you could act, on a use policy and also direct staff to work on a surveillance ordinance like many others in California. I've had the pleasure of working with Michael. I would love to work with your chief and help others, walk them through the framework and train them on it if that would be useful to you. But it provides you with much more information than what you have today. Without a baseline of info, without an annual reporting mechanism, the public has no idea what you're doing, and you don't know whether or not this technology is effective. So we recommend, I'm not going to repeat what we said in our letter out of respect for your time. But there are some areas of improvement, but you're getting close. We really do applaud you for the path that you've been on. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Over.
We also received 2 emails in, and I just forwarded you Brian's email as well. So the first one comes from Constance Quirk. She says, crime has skyrocketed in our city these past number of years. Every day we hear and read of porch pirates stealing packages, car and house break-ins. Stores have had mobs stealing large quantities of merchandise, and catalytic converters are sawed off daily in addition to outright vehicle theft. Crime is very common in Burlingame. It's not a big city situation anymore. It has invaded small towns and cities up and down the peninsula. LPR cameras, stationary or mobile, are like any modern smartphone camera. They take photographs of the license plates and stamp the picture with the date, time, and location coordinates of where they were taken. Other nearby cities have rolled out this technology, but some members of our city council still want to study it more and issue more surveys. I would also add that sometimes the sight of a camera would be enough to deter some criminals from executing their plans. Let's give the Burlingame Police Department a great tool for deterring criminals. Communities deserve to have their law enforcement agencies equipped with the best technologies to prevent and solve crimes, and we deserve to live in a safe town. Please stop overthinking this issue and do the right thing. We also got an email in from Charles Voitan. He just says opposed to ALPRs. And that's it.
Very good. Okay, so I am going to bring it back to colleagues and for comment and for direction. This is what we're looking for, is direction for staff. Yes. Okay. So colleagues, any thoughts? I mean, I'm happy to start it out. When this was brought up years ago, I was prepared to go at it then. My thought has always been, if you're driving in the city, your license plate is exposed. So any assumption that it's not being recorded or is not being seen I don't agree with that. I think that we can create enough boundaries with our policies to make this addressed are any issues with civil liberties and with abuses. And I think that if we have periodic reporting, we can keep track of that. And I don't know that I would be in favor of having something where we have to reauthorize it every year, but I would certainly want to see a report annually of what the statistics are. So I'm ready to move forward. With that, Councilmember Colson.
Very odd. Sometimes I feel like we're playing Jeopardy on the square servicing, putting their little hand in. So thanks for keeping track of it all. I just want to say that I really appreciate the mayor's perspective. I was not on the council at the time you first discussed this. So it's helpful to have perspective around it. And I also really liked last time we discussed this Councilmember O'Brien's commentary about maybe starting up like a pilot program, a little bit smaller, and then seeing how it all goes and working from there. So I'll support the mayor's suggestion to move forward, and it sounds like he's been thinking about it for a very long time, and I really respect and trust his judgment on this. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for leading us off.
Thank you. Councilmember Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate the robust discussion. I appreciate that staff it made a recommendation to have 30-day data retention. That's a lot better than a lot of cities. So I think that that's appropriate if this moves forward. I do think that, I would like to see us moving forward, create, and I've been talking behind the scenes about a surveillance vetting technology ordinance moving forward. There's going to be more technology like this. We should have a process. We should have a policy in place so that we are thoroughly understanding these new kind of technologies, doing an impact analysis and understanding what the pros and cons are, kind of data-driven rather than just anecdotally driven. And I think that that's an important thing to aspire to. I would feel more comfortable if we adopted a policy that was similar to the Lexipol-based policy that Alameda is working off of, because I think it has some additional benefits because it was vetted through some folks that are really watching the civil liberties on this. So I think that would be great if we could adopt something that uses that model, that makes sure that we have baselines, that makes sure we have annual reporting, and that we're looking at, is this actually being effective? So I think those are things that would be a lot better. This is not an area I'm super comfortable with, but I think those would be important improvements. So thank you for considering that.
Thank you, Councilmember Beach. Councilmember O'Brien.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be consistent in my comments as I was at the last meeting we had. I actually at this time don't feel we need the surveillance impact report. I think that delays this even more and puts a lot of burden on our staff and added cost. So I would actually just like to move forward and implement the pilot type program, start small, see how that goes. Then we can see, what's working, what's not working. I have heard from many constituents. I heard it from the first time we talked about this years back. And as Mayor Ortiz brought up, privacy issues became an issue with people back then, but technology's advanced over the years. And geez, your iPhone is, basically anyone can basically find where you are. You go through tolling bridges. They're taking, pictures of your license plates. So, to me, according to our chief of police, I'm glad he was able to clarify the warrants, because that was a little confusing, the first time around. So basically it's attached to the name, not the license plate. So I do think, there are multiple cities utilizing this technology and it is working well. So I would like to, I want our constituents to, feel safe. I want our merchants to feel safe. And so I think it's our duty to implement this program. As I said, I don't think we need the impact report. However, I do feel it's important to have an annual summary so that we are kept in tune and the public is kept in tune of how this is being utilized. And then it gives us the opportunity then to collect that base data. And if we want to change things futuristically, we can have that opportunity to do so. But I do think we have to develop kind of baseline data, and we can do that by annual reporting.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with the annual reporting. We can tweak it as we need. Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to start with a question, but I'll let staff answer it at the end of my comments. So the question I have is, I couldn't quite tell from the staff report whether if you wanted to adopt a surveillance technology ordinance, whether that had to come before, a trial deployment of ALPRs, or it could be done, whether you could do the two in tandem. So that's a question that I'll come back to. I appreciate the point about trying to catch criminals. And if we thought this was really good for that, that'd be valuable. And forgive me for telling this story, but I have lived in a police state. So I have lived where there was a young guy with a machine gun on every single corner. And let me tell you, there's no street crime in that city. And it's a miserable freaking place to live. And so the reason I hesitate with some of this stuff is because we can live in a state with very little crime, and it's not a state most of us would want to live in, because you can put a camera on every single corner. You can you can do that, but you don't want to live there. I don't think. And then I would recommend, if we're going to adopt this next time, please read those letters that Mr. Hofer sent in. And the example of a Black family being pulled over, kids 19, 17, and 6, face down with handcuffs on because the license plate happened to come off a motorcycle that had been stolen. Well, it wasn't even the same license plate, but it was confused with a motorcycle that had been stolen, and the police pull them over and cuff them and have guns on them. And that's what I worry about, and again, it's not racial profiling until the interaction happens. So the robot is not profiling, I get it. But every time we create an opportunity for bad things to happen, we run the risk. So yes, we can catch bad guys, but boy, there is a big downside risk. And, I said this a long time ago too, which is, every Black family, and mostly every family of color, has this conversation with their teenage drivers, and they're scared to death when they get their licenses, their driver's license. And we as, mainly white parents, we don't have that conversation. We don't live that way. So it's just being a little sympathetic to how other people, their experiences. And so the more times we make interactions that sometimes go wrong. And again, I have the highest regard for our chief. He knows that. And I think he trains his force as good as any force in this country not to make those kind of mistakes. But those are the risks. Okay, that's the downside risk. So I think the policy that the chief is laying out here of basically putting this in entrances and exits. I mean, again, read the data. Mostly this is good at catching stolen cars, but okay, great. We can do a better job catching stolen cars. It's not gonna, well, whatever. Anyway, so I would like to see us, to get to the point, I would like to see us adopt a surveillance technology ordinance and have some guardrails about how this is gonna get used. If everyone here is in such a hurry to adopt it and put it at the borders of our city, I guess I'm okay with that. The worst that happens is we decide it's useless and we rip it out again and it's $30,000 down the drain. I mean, but I would like to see us adopt a surveillance ordinance in conjunction. It doesn't have to be beforehand, that lays out rules of the road and guardrails and maybe can adjust the way we use this going forward. Because again, I think the chances that it does a lot of good are pretty low. Chances that it does a lot of harm are also very low, but the harm is really bad if it happens. And so that's where I'm coming from on this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I realize I'm probably in the minority on this, but again, I've lived with this kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so staff, I'm not sure do you have enough direction, so let's talk about this a little more. So what Councilmember O'Brien is proposing is to do a pilot where we have a small amount of cameras and entrances to the city. And that would be done. I would be comfortable if it was done in conjunction with adopting this policy that we received in the staff report. So tell me, colleagues, are you guys, everybody okay with that concept? Moving forward with the pilot.
Mr. Mayor, could we add that we'll also, in conjunction for future technologies, work on developing a surveillance vetting technology ordinance so that we have those guardrails in place for future technology that may come through? And it sounds like there's some good models out there.
Great. Councilmember Colson.
Maybe to the chief, I just want to understand. Go ahead and implement based on what we've got in the staff report, and then we can, over the course of the next 6 months, year, whatever, if the council agrees, and I'm not saying whether I agree or not, I'm just trying to understand the critical path here. We can implement the cameras and then we can still follow on, or city attorney may be the one to answer this, follow on with the ordinance, or would we have to hold off on the cameras in order to do the surveillance ordinance first?
So the way I'm seeing it, and I'm sorry, Mr. City Attorney, give me just a second just to make sure that we're all clear. We have a framework of an ordinance that we're talking about here, which is way short of what Councilmember Beach was talking about, which would require a little more time and a little staff time. So the reason I want to stop right here is what I'm saying is let's not put any cameras up until we all agree on this, on the guardrails, so to speak, right? And then if we want to go beyond that to create a policy for surveillance, then that's one step further. But Councilmember Beach, do you agree with what I just said?
I'm a little confused. So I think what it sounds like is there's a majority of the council that wants to move forward with this, with the staff proposal. What I think Councilmember Brownrigg and I are trying to advocate for is we like Councilmember O'Brien's agreement to like, let's do an annual reporting in a year. Let's evaluate how it's going. And B, let's also work on creating a surveillance vetting technology ordinance so that in the future, when future technology comes up, we've got a plan for how we tackle these things.
Okay, but
and a
here's
policy.
the clarification I'm looking for. You're not saying that the pilot program is subject to coming up with that first?
Yeah, in a perfect world, I'd love to see it, but I don't think that's what we're saying, because I think there's a majority of the council that wants to move forward with this sooner. So I think what Councilmember Brownrigg and I are trying to say is, given that it's moving forward, can we also agree to have staff look at these this framework that exists out there to create a surveillance vetting technology ordinance, not for this deployment, not for this pilot program, but for future technologies, so that when issues like this come up, we've got some policy framework that we can appropriately vet and do a thoughtful impact analysis, et cetera.
Right. Colleagues, I see your hands raised, but I'm going to bring it to our city attorney. Looked like he was ready to say something.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, I think here are some options in front of the council. If the council wishes to move forward with a pilot project now without having to adopt an ordinance first, you can certainly do that. You can certainly go forward, give staff direction to go forward with a pilot project now, and we would adopt a use policy in conjunction with that. And then I think I heard 3 council members say that they would also like an annual review as part of that initial pilot program deployment. And we can certainly do that. We do not have to adopt an ordinance first in order to launch that pilot project. Then at a later date, either at your annual review or some other time, the council can also give direction to the staff, if it wished, to pursue some sort of surveillance technology ordinance. But to be super clear, the adoption of the surveillance technology ordinance does not that is not required before you launch your pilot project or pilot program.
Great. And then Michael, Council Member, Vice Mayor Brownrigg, give me just a second. So if we were doing the pilot, could you give me a sense of what that pilot would look like, Chief, as far as how many cameras?
So again, in the staff report, I gave you an option of 14 or 6 locations. I also heard, though, coverage of all the entrances and exits to the city. We have a lot of entrances and exits to the city. The small pilot program that I put together with 6 cameras is not going to even put a dent into that. The actual 14 location one did really good coverage of all the entrances and exits. But so that was kind of just a basic version of surrounding our city was with 14. 6 is a little smaller than that.
And 14 location, does that mean 1 camera per location?
No, it's 14 locations. Some of the big intersections, maybe on El Camino, might need a little bit more. So I would estimate, I haven't talked to any vendors, that it would probably be closer to 20 cameras to cover 14 locations. Even the six location one I gave would probably be closer to 10 to 12 cameras. We could even go smaller. We could just put in a couple of major intersections if we want to even do that. But to get really good coverage, like I heard earlier, the 14 location one is probably your best bet. But
okay, thank you, Chief. Vice Mayor.
So this will sound maybe contradictory to some of my colleagues. It seems to me if we're going to do a trial, we might as well do a trial at the 14 spots. That's $45,000, and you might as well figure out if it works. What I would like to suggest is that we make a commitment amongst ourselves that so I won't stand in the way, I'm not even sure I could, but I won't stand in the way of going forward without a surveillance policy. But we should make a commitment that before we renew this.
You went mute, Michael.
Sorry, I don't know why. So go forward with the pilot if we must, before we have a surveillance plan, but make a commitment that before the year is out and we're reviewing the results, we will have a surveillance policy in place. And by the way, I suspect Councilwoman Beach meant this, but I don't think it's only for like future not yet invented technologies. It would also be looking at any surveillance technology, including ALPRs. And then finally, I would suggest that this might be the kind of thing we're having a subcommittee of council. And right away, I'll say I don't have to be on it. I'm not making that case. I just think it might be one of these areas we're having a subcommittee of council that can work offline with the chief and the city manager and the city attorney and really dig deep in policy and consequences and so forth would be valuable. I would certainly support that. But what I guess to cut it brief, I would go for 14, and I would like a commitment that we will have a policy and we will do our best efforts. So best efforts to have a policy in place before we renew.
Okay, colleagues, what's your thinking on that? What the vice mayor just said? I kind of seem to, okay, I do think that if we limit the locations, we're not going to get a real good sense of what the cameras can do. And so I kind of agree with the 14 locations, and it's roughly 20 cameras is what we said, correct, Chief? Did I hear you right?
20 to 25.
Okay. Councilmember Coulson.
It keeps going up.
I'm good with it too. I actually think that there's two ways to look at pilot. It's expansiveness and it's time. And what we're talking about is, a pilot program could be covering everything we think we need to cover, and we review it in a year. And I think that's the efficacy around that's probably the highest to really understand the implications.
Great. Councilmember O'Brien.
Yeah, I would agree. The 14 would probably be the better approach. And then, as I've mentioned, I think the yearly report will give us a lot more data, and then we can make, changes at that time if we choose to do so.
Okay, so staff, I think we have a pretty.
Mr. Mayor,
yes, sir.
I'm sorry to push on this point, but I've been in government long enough to know that if staff doesn't hear a consensus, they won't do it. So do we have a consensus that there should be a best efforts pledge to have a surveillance policy in place before the year is out, so that when we come around to looking at the report for 1 year? I'm sorry, do you have your hand up, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor. If I may, I'd like to clarify for the council, there is a difference between a surveillance policy and a surveillance ordinance. If we were to deploy the ALPRs, we must have the policy in place, and the policy would be the draft policy in your staff report or something like that. The ordinance is a different animal, which would require the more robust analysis, including the impact report that was mentioned in the staff report. So to reiterate, before you could do any pilot program, we must have the use policy in place. And again, there's a draft of that already prepared. Preparing an ordinance would be a different legislative act and would require additional analysis. So I just want to make sure that everybody has the same information. We're using the same vocabulary.
Yeah, so that we don't talk across each other. I appreciate that. So I guess I would like to suggest that we work towards an ordinance. I don't think any of us really know what that entails, but I think having especially a subcommittee of council, but people who are looking at that overall impact on cost benefit, on social benefit, the rest of it, what's laid out basically in the surveillance technology ordinance would be good to have. And I think we really ought to try to have it by the end of this year, which is not an aggressive timetable. The end of the first year of trial.
So 1 year from the time the cameras are first installed.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Hey, I would prefer actually just implementing the surveillance use policy and see how it goes for a year and then reevaluate whether an ordinance is needed. I just don't think the ordinance is needed at this point with all these additional staff time that would have to be put together and costs for all this additional data to be gathered until we really know what our baseline data is from utilizing this policy for a year. I think we're jumping the gun a little bit. I'd rather see the data first before jumping to an ordinance.
Councilmember Beach.
Thanks. Appreciate the comment. I think what the ordinance would do is provide us framework to vet any future technology, surveillance technology that could come through. I think that is really time well spent. And it could also help us give an analysis of how we look at the baseline data, how we look at the impact of the past year's data. But I think most importantly, it's beyond ALPR. It's getting to whatever other future technology may come across our desk. Thank you.
Do you mind if guys, let me ask this to the city attorney, what would be the workload entailed in creating? I mean, I'm sure we can copy it from somebody else and customize it to Burlingame, but I'm just curious, how much work would that be?
So preparing the ordinance itself would not necessarily be that difficult, considering that there are other models out there. However, the ordinance requires a surveillance impact report, which requires a more in-depth analysis of the impacts of the technology, both known and what you know at the time, and experiential information from other agencies. That analysis will require additional staff time. So that's where the real staff time would come in, would be to prepare the surveillance impact report as that would be required under the ordinance. So the ordinance itself, not necessarily difficult, but preparing the impact report and the study that's where the staff time would come in.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Coulson.
Okay, I'm going to make a suggestion so we can move forward. What if, it sounds like we can get our head around and consensus around the report and the recommendation, 14 cameras and everything today. I think that we can raise this as a future agenda item down the road. It could be tonight if you guys want, it could be later. Because I would just like a sort of one-page staff overview, kind of summarizing what City Attorney Guina just said. So, and to really understand what this report means, the kind of data, how we would use it, because I agree that maybe down the road there will be future technology, when you walk into a store or you walk into the city offices and your face gets scanned or whatever it might happen. But I don't feel that, I feel that we can break them apart as two separate items, deal with the one, and come back with a little more information on the other in a month or so, and then make a decision as to how impactful that will be on the staff and the benefits of it. And then we can move forward from there.
I completely agree with that. If anybody would like to suggest a future agenda item, I think that it's very worthy of a conversation, but I think we need more information. Councilmember Beach, I think you went up first. Wait, I'm sorry. Madam City Manager, did you have a comment on that? No, I'm sorry. I thought I saw your hand go up. Councilmember Beach.
Well, I think in tonight's staff report, there's a pretty good summary of what a surveillance impact report is. There's a whole bunch of bullets there, and it's really just providing more robust data-driven study of the social impact and the civil liberties impact, rather than just like anecdotally going to check and see, hey, other police chiefs, how's it working? It's like a deep analysis, which can only be good for policymaking, right? The more information we have about stuff like surveillance technology, the better decisions we can make for the community. So I feel very strongly, if we're going to try to get a unanimous decision to let's do this pilot program, that an important part of this conversation is to commit to really putting some policy in place that makes sure we are vetting stuff thoroughly in the future. And it's in the staff report. I think it's a great idea, and I hope we can move forward with this as opposed to having another future agenda item where we've already spent a lot of time on this already.
You're here.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Yes, through the mayor. So this is to the chief. Did you say none of the San Mateo County cities have an ordinance, just the big cities, correct?
Yeah, just the big cities that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm gonna respectfully disagree at this point. I would rather, like I said before, and it's the last time I'll say it. I think we just do the pilot and see what our baseline data is first. To try to do a policy of potential future technology, that's grasping at straws of what that potential future technology is. I really want to see how this pilot goes and see, are there tweaks that we need to make? And that may lead to an ordinance. I don't know, but I don't want to make a decision now of something I don't even know what the baseline data is. So that's the last comment I have on this.
Okay, Councilman, Vice Mayor Brownrigg.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to, I guess, come to you, Mr. Mayor, but I agree with Councilwoman Beach. I think this is just good policy and holding off, because the actual recommendation would be to do this before you deployed a trial, is, I think, a reasonable compromise. It's not, this has been done before. There are models out there. There's a group that will walk us through how we gather the data. And we really, if we're going to start surveilling everybody, I think government should be on the hook for making sure the data has high quality and that we're doing all the things that are in these bullets. Like, to me, this is, I can't believe we wouldn't do this. And so I don't think we have to go through a year to see whether, I don't even know what we would know at the end of the year. Let's go ahead and get this policy in place. It's almost irrespective of the ALPR thing.
Okay, so I kind of tend to agree with the two of you as far as the policy and looking forward. What I don't agree is I don't think that we need to tie it to the surveillance, to the ALPRs. And so I'm willing to move forward with the ALPRs, and I will pursue the other policy, see, and I'm trying to get, because now I don't want to get in trouble with the city attorney here. With the other proposal, we could look at that in the future. But I do believe that we have enough to move forward with the pilot, and so I'm going to go along with that, and then we can actually talk about a subcommittee, talk about what to do as far as additional policy. So with that, I think staff, you have enough to go on.
So can I clarify something then through the
Yes.
mayor? So you're basically saying, because it sounds a little bit like a motion, that we move forward with the pilot study with the 14 locations that are mentioned in the staff report and establish a use policy.
Correct.
The ordinance is a whole separate issue that may
So
come
we're,
to discussion, because you're using policy twice, and I think one
no,
is
I'm sorry,
policy
and I apologize.
and then one is ordinance.
I was trying to go back to what the city attorney told us. So you're absolutely right. That's exactly. But I think where you and I differ is I think we should move forward with considering the ordinance. I don't want to put that one to bed right away, but I don't want it to delay the cameras, is what I'm saying. So I'm falling somewhere in between the two sides. Does that make
But
sense?
my question is, are you incorporating that into?
No.
Okay, so it's
Separate
a
issue.
separate. Very
That's
good.
what I'm
Okay,
saying.
that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, it may be a separate issue, but so the use policy, that's a sine qua non. You have to have a use policy before you can do the trial. So that, there's no choice about that. That's
Absolutely.
right. The second question is a security surveillance ordinance, policy ordinance. And I thought what you agreed, Mr. Mayor, was that we should begin that work, whether it results in an ordinance, who knows, but that we should commence the work and not wait for a year. And that's what I think Councilwoman Beach and I were strongly suggesting would be a good thing to do.
I'm saying, no, so what I'm saying is we should bring it up as a separate agenda item and discuss it in the future. I don't want to make it part of this decision tonight. So Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this. I would really appreciate if Councilmember Beach and Councilmember and Vice Mayor Brownrigg would just, it's just, I want to learn more. I want to understand more. I just need more time. and it's not a year, it's a couple months. I want to get this ordinance done. I mean, I want to get this, this agenda item done. I'm happy to bring this back on a, I know you're upset about it. You maybe don't want to hear it come back on a future agenda item, but I'm just respectfully requesting a little bit more time so that, and bring it back, and I can just focus on that, do a little more research, maybe have a meeting myself personally with city attorney. I just need a little more time. So again, not saying that I don't want this to be characterized like 2 people were for it and 3 people are against. I don't think that's at all. I think people are just asking for a little bit of time, and I'm hoping you can grant that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Councilman Beach. I think if what we're talking about is we come back to this in a couple of months and we start the work and we all roll up our shirt sleeves, I think that's fine. I'm asking that, no, I'm not, I'm asking this to be bifurcated into 2 pieces. And you guys can vote no on it, I guess, but if you want, but I just am asking for some time. It can come back. The mayor can put it back on the agenda before break or after break, and we can discuss it. I just have more research I want to do, more I want to understand about it, because if we're going to do it, I don't want to commit to doing it. I'm not ready to commit to doing it right now. So if you're going to force me to take a decision, I'm going to say no. And then I'm going to not be happy. But if you give me a little bit of time, like give us a little time, like I don't understand why it has to happen right now tonight. I can hear your words and we're saying it, but Yeah, no, I think we're actually very close to being on the same page. Nobody thinks we're going to pass this tonight. It's more the commitment to do the work. So I think we are on the same page. Can I just quickly ask the city attorney or the police chief, how do we develop the use policy, which is different than the technology ordinance? How does that happen?
So, if I may, Mr. Mayor,
yes, please.
The use policy, again, there is a draft of that attached to your staff report, right? And the description of the basics, the must-haves of the use policy are included in the staff report too. So that could be developed very quickly. And as part of the the rest of the rollout of the pilot program. I think that answers your question, but I'll pause there and ask if I did answer your question.
Yep. Well, from my point of view, I don't quite understand. I mean, so for example, if one of us felt like there was a line item to add to the use policy, or if Mr. Hofer had some suggestions, how do we work through comments?
Sure.
How does that happen?
Sure.
Or maybe there's a deadline for comments. Maybe that's what you want to do. I'm not sure.
Right. So I would say that the absolute deadline for having the policy done is before we flip the on switch on the pilot program, right? Because the policy document must be in place. I would say before you turn on the on switch for the ALPRs. In terms of how we develop that after this, so I'll ask the chief for guidance, but typically the Lexipol policies are adopted administratively. Is that correct, Chief? And not necessarily adopted by any action of the council. So if the council, I would say that if the council had some specific direction about what they would like to see in a use policy beyond what is minimally required by the statute, then we would look for council direction on what additional stuff or additional policy points that you'd like to see in our in the Burlingame policy beyond the minimum requirements of the statute.
Okay, so so right now, if we give you green light, you're going to go get bids on the cameras. We're how far away from even them being installed? I mean, we're months and months away, right?
Yeah, I would have to, yeah, I'd have to get bids. I would assume we'd have to go back and within their staff report as far as finalizing who we're using and probably the policy and the number of cameras just to finalize it. I'm not sure at that.
Well, I think as far as the number of cameras and the locations, I think, well, you keep going up, so I don't know where you're at right now.
I can get it to 20. I can get it to 20, but so the question is to for this policy, if colleagues have any issues and want to change it, we have a lot of time between now and the time that they flip the switch to be able to put it on the agenda and have a discussion about it, correct? I would assume we have at least a couple months, if not.
So we have at least a couple meetings before they're ready to flip the switch. So we could put it back on the agenda and discuss it in case there's people who have some specific issues. Yes, staff, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna take that as a yes because nobody said no. So Councilmember Beach, I think you were up next.
Thank you. I think one thing that's missing from this sort of boilerplate Lexapro is the annual review analysis, which we seem to all agree is a good thing to do. So I hope that that can be added, and I hope that staff will take a look at the Alameda policy and see if there's any other good stuff there, because that's been vetted through some other organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Great comment. Councilmember O'Brien.
No, that's okay. I actually was going to say the same as Councilmember Beach in regards to the annual review, because that is not mentioned in the surveillance use policy that's in our staff report. So if we're going to make a motion to move forward on this, we need to add that to the surveillance use policy that is mentioned in our staff report.
And I believe what we were doing today was doing direction. We're not actually voting on it.
That's correct, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor. We're only asking for direction tonight.
Very good.
And I think,
Okay.
So to clarify, just so everybody's on board, we are agreeing to move with the 14 locations, and he's probably up to 35 cameras by now, but so roughly, Chief, you said about 25 cameras?
20 to 25.
Okay, so and then we also agree that before the switch goes on, we will have the policy presented to us again for approval, correct? Everybody good with that? Yes? Okay. And then again, separate issue that we will put on the agenda in the future would be the surveillance ordinance, which I think is worthy of discussion. So with that, everybody good, happy? I think we come up with a pretty good compromise, and I think that we can move forward. Chief, 40 cameras now? Where are we?
50.
Very good. Thank you, guys. That was great discussion. So I really appreciate it. So next, we're going to item number 11, which is council committee and activity reports and announcements. So colleagues, anybody have anything they need to report to us? And having none, then we will move on to item number 12, which is future agenda items. So I have Councilmember Beach.
I have one at least. I think it's time to consider whether or not we'll raise the progress flag this spring. So I'd like to propose that if anybody else would like to second.
I'm with you on that one. So definitely we'll have that one. And so when do we need, that needs to be on pretty soon, doesn't it?
We can put that on. It's a two-stepper. So you've taken the first step tonight. We just need to bring it once back, and Pride Month is in June. So we'll bring it to one of your next couple meetings. And I would suggest that we, as part of this, suggest that you approve raising the Progress Pride flag, or whatever subsequent iteration of Progress Pride flag may happen to be every year, rather than having to do this dance every year. So we can just do one staff report, and it will be an in perpetuity thing,
So
unless a future
Councilmember
council
Beach,
decides to
would
change
you,
it.
I will amend my motion, yes.
and I will amend my second. So thank you.
Right,
Yes,
thank you. So we'll
good.
bring that back to you in the next couple meetings.
Excellent, thank you. With that, we move on to acknowledgement.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
while
ma'am.
I have the mic, I would also like to propose that we pursue a surveillance vetting technology ordinance.
I suspect you have a second. Yes. Yes, very good. Thank you very much. Noted. Anybody else? before we move on? Okay. And then with that, I'll move on to item 13, acknowledgement. We have agenda packets for the Planning Commission, Traffic Safety Parking Commission, Beautification Commission, Parks and Rec Commission, and the Library Board of Trustees. Colleagues, is there anybody we would like to adjourn? Somebody that, I don't see anybody. So with that, that's a great meeting, a very good discussion. We all agreed to disagree and remain cordial. So with that, adjourn. Thank you all.